Hello there. Tonight we slip into the smoke-stained rafters of a thatched hut where the fire crackles low, the straw mattress prickles your back, and a piglet snorts somewhere by your feet. You're just a baby, wide-eyed, wrinkled, and utterly unaware that your entire life is going to be a tug-of-war between hunger, disease, and your local lord's taxes. A rooster crows before sunrise, your mother groans into motion, and your father is already outside, ankle-deep in mud and obligation. You're not going to grow up with a favorite toy, unless you count that rock with a funny shape. And you probably won't survive this, but let's see how far we can get. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is where you are. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You come into this world unceremoniously. No hospital, no sterile sheets, just the back corner of a single-room cottage that smells like boiled leeks and damp wool. Your mother groans, the midwife whispers a prayer to St. Margaret, and someone hands you to your father, who's never quite sure whether to smile or start pacing. There's no certificate, no name engraved in stone. Just a few drops of holy water and your name, muttered quickly into the air during baptism, because infant mortality is real, and nobody's taking chances. You grow up fast. You have to. By age 5, your main job is not dying. Not from cold, not from rats, not from accidentally poking yourself with a rusty nail while pretending to be a knight using a turnip as a sword. By 7, you're fetching water, herding chickens, and already strong enough to carry firewood that smells like the forest and your uncle's socks. The hut you call home? It's cozy in the most charitable sense. Walls made of wattle and daub, basically sticks crammed with mud and hope. The roof is thatched and leaky. When it rains, the ceiling drips with the gentle rhythm of sleep somewhere else. You sleep on straw, and if you're lucky, you don't wake up with a goose nesting in your hair. At night, it's crowded. Your siblings snore beside you. Your parents huddle by the fire. Sometimes an uncle drops in, or a cousin, or a traveler your father owes a favor. And then, of course, there's the animals. Chickens, usually. Maybe a goat. Maybe a piglet, warm, twitchy, and surprisingly judgy. You don't have toys. You've got sticks. Maybe a carved doll. One lucky kid in your village has a ball made of pig bladder, and he guards it like a dragon's hoard. Now and then, you get a break. A local feast day. A saint celebration. You run wild through the fields, eating cold oat cakes and pretending you're not barefoot on a thistle patch. But the rest of the time? You're working. Everyone is. Even the babies are expected to at least look useful. And the work never ends. Your father plows the same narrow strips of land every year, the same soil his grandfather cursed in Latin. Your mother brews ale, grinds grain, and tries not to scream every time the thatch catches fire, again. You help. Of course you do. Not because you're noble, but because that's just how life works here. You've never heard of childhood as a concept. You just grow, like turnips and regrets. Your village is small, maybe 30 to 50 people, give or take a plague. Everyone knows everyone, and everyone knows who stole whose sheep 3 summers ago. You're born into this tight-knit web of dirt and survival. And there's no getting out. Now, about the Lord. Yes, the man who owns everything, including your patience. He lives up the hill in a stone manor house with actual glass in the windows, which is the medieval version of driving a Lamborghini through a famine. Your family doesn't own the land. You hold it. Rent it. Borrow it. live on it at the mercy of a man who collects your best grain as tax and still expects you to thank him. You owe him labor. Days and days of working his fields, repairing his fences, or building his barns. That's called corvée, and no, you can't call in sick. In theory, he protects you. Keeps you safe from raiders, outlaws, and the occasional wild boar with a grudge. In practice, he mostly shows up to collect stuff, your wheat, your chickens, your very soul, well, not officially. But sometimes he throws a feast. Roasted meat, music, dancers. It's amazing. Until you realize it's mostly an excuse to show off his new velvet hat and remind you how replaceable you are. And yet, somehow, you survive. Maybe it's the thick soup. Maybe it's the one good blanket your grandma wove before the plague took her. Maybe it's sheer stubbornness. Historians still argue whether peasant life was brutal and short or just rough but manageable if no plague showed up. But one thing is clear, you learn how to adapt. You laugh. You dance. You curse the frost. You whisper stories by the fire. And you go to sleep hoping tomorrow won't involve wolves, a toothache, or another royal tax. Oh, and quirky fact, some families in your village believe keeping a hedgehog under the floorboards brings good luck. Others just think it eats the bugs. Either way, Gerald the hedgehog is an honorary cousin. So you drift off to sleep again on that scratchy bed, warmed by family, livestock, and the steady firelight flickering on the thatched ceiling. And outside? The cold wind howls through the trees. You're still here. For now. You wake up to the sound of your stomach arguing with itself, again. The morning fire has gone to embers, and someone's already clanging around with a wooden ladle and a sour expression. Breakfast isn't going to fix much. It's gruel. Again. Grain boiled in water, maybe thickened with yesterday's leftovers, maybe not. If you're lucky, there's a drizzle of honey or a splash of last week's ale, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. Your whole childhood is built around food, not eating it, but chasing it. You learn to spot wild nettles before you know how to spell your own name. You can fish with a bent nail and a worm. And you're disturbingly good at pretending turnip stew tastes different when served in a different bowl. Most of your meals begin with barley, oats, or rye. Wheat is fancy, something you only taste at the Lord's table or on feast days, when they're handing out holy bread like it's a miracle. Which, honestly, it is. The kind of miracle that doesn't mold within a week. You eat what's available, not what you crave. No one asks, "What do you feel like for dinner?" because the answer is always, "Not this again." But you make do. You learn to make broth from bones that have already seen 3 meals. You thicken it with stale bread. You flavor it with onions, if you're lucky, or if your neighbor isn't home and their garden wall is climbable. Meat? A rare guest at your table. You might get pork during slaughter season. Maybe a rabbit if you can catch one and your lord doesn't catch you poaching it. Some peasants are bold enough to set traps in the Lord's forest, even though the punishment is steep, anything from a fine to having your ears lopped off. You decide it's worth the risk when your little sister starts dreaming about roast chicken that doesn't exist. And then there are the greens. Spinach, leeks, cabbage, onions, and stinging nettles, plenty of them. Some folks swear by pottage, a kind of stew that evolves in the pot over several days. You just keep adding stuff to it, beans, roots, herbs, more gruel, and let it bubble into oblivion. Historians still argue whether pottage was a nourishing miracle or just swampy sadness in a bowl. Your taste buds adapt. You get excited over salted herring. Dried peas become exotic. And when your mother finds a single apple in autumn, everyone shares it like it's the Holy Grail. But here's the twist, you're not always starving. There are good years, when the rains come just right, when blight skips your fields, when the rats go on vacation. And in those years, your pantry overflows with stored grain, dried legumes, and root vegetables stacked like treasure in the cellar. You even make ale from barley, and everyone drinks it, even the toddlers. Because water is, ironically, too risky. Ale isn't just for fun. It's food. Liquid bread. A low-alcohol, mildly fizzy, nutritious concoction your mother brews in buckets and guards like her own heartbeat. The house smells like yeast and wood smoke, and you know it's a good day when there's foam dribbling down the sides of the barrel. You eat with your hands or with carved wooden spoons. Plates? Optional. Knives? You bring your own. Your table, if you have one, is a plank of wood balanced on barrels. Sometimes you eat sitting on the floor, huddled with your family, sharing gossip and boiled onions. Quirky tidbit, some peasants believed garlic could ward off evil spirits and bad harvests. So, you hang braids of it above the door and chew it raw if a cow gives birth to a calf with 3 ears. Also, surprisingly effective at clearing out a room. Your relationship with food becomes spiritual. Not in the Michelin star way, but in the please, St. Bridget, bless this mess way. You give thanks before eating, not just out of piety, but out of raw, grateful or that anything ended up in your bowl. Feast days? That's when you truly live. The church calendar is generous with saints and holy events, and each one comes with a reason to roast something, bake something, or drink something until your uncle starts reciting bad poetry. On Christmas or Easter, you might even see a goose. That's high living. You tear it apart with your hands, lick the fat from your fingers, and dream about it for the next 6 months. But even in celebration, you know famine can return like a rude houseguest. One bad harvest, one flood, one pest infestation, and suddenly your stomach's louder than your prayers. So you learn to dry food. Smoke meat. Salt fish. Pickle beets. Anything to cheat spoilage. You hide your hoard like a dragon, especially when your neighbor's sheep goes missing and everyone gets twitchy. And then there's famine season, the hungry gap. Between the last of the winter stores and the first green shoots of spring, your family tightens its belt. Meals shrink. Rationing begins. You eat yesterday's bread soaked in broth and tell yourself it's a new recipe. You dig for tubers. You get creative with the goat's milk. Still, somehow, your body persists. Bone-thin but resourceful, like a raccoon with a grudge. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants were chronically malnourished or just incredibly efficient with limited ingredients. Either way, your survival depends on rhythm, knowing when to sow, when to reap, when to fast, and when to fight off that goose again because it's eyeing your only cabbage. And remember, salt is a luxury. You trade for it. You save for it. You dream of it. It preserves meat, heals wounds, and sometimes even counts as rent. Tonight's dinner? It's a thin porridge made from barley, thickened with mashed beans and flavored with a sprig of thyme. Not fancy, not filling, but it's warm. And when your little sister falls asleep with a full belly and a smile, it almost feels like a feast. Almost. You drag a wooden hoe across dry earth while your hands blister and your back groans like a church bell in winter. This land, this stubborn patch of clumpy soil and rocks the size of turnips, isn't yours. It never will be. It belongs to the Lord. So does the wheat you grow here. And the chickens you feed. And the clothes on your back, which are starting to resemble a medieval jigsaw puzzle held together by wishful thinking and pig grease. Because here's the truth, your Lord owns your socks. Technically, he owns everything. The land, the tools, the mill, the fish in the stream, and the air in your lungs if he ever figures out how to tax it. You're a serf, bonded to his manor, legally tethered like a particularly nervous cow. You can't move away without permission. You can't marry outside the manor. You can't even bake your own bread in peace unless you use his oven and pay his fee. The village mill is a racket. You bring your grain there, hopeful for fresh flour. What you get is a smaller sack than you arrived with and a lecture about how water levels are low so the grinding was delicate. The miller, paid by the lord, of course, skims his share, then passes you what's left, smiling like he's just done you a personal favor. You grumble but say nothing. You need the flour more than you need your pride. And rents? Oh, the rents. You owe in crops, labor, poultry, sometimes even eggs. You give the Lord your best harvest, the smoothest grain, the plumpest duck, while your family scrapes by on the leftovers. In good years, this arrangement is irritating. In bad years, it's rage-inducing. But rebellion? Not yet. You're still playing the long game, survival. Each week, you're required to give your lord free labor. That's corvée, and it eats up time you could be spending on your own land. Mondays might mean repairing the manor's fences. Tuesdays, digging drainage ditches. Fridays, hauling manure from one pile to another pile, for reasons never explained. Quirky detail? Sometimes the Lord Steward gets oddly specific about your duties, like cleaning goose pens with bundled reeds or counting the manor's bees. There's nothing quite like bee counting with a guy who thinks your name is Boy. Your lord rarely visits your part of the world. He prefers his solar, the sunny, elevated chamber of his manor, where he drinks imported wine and complains about the cost of velvet. When he does come around, it's with retinue, flair, and all the subtlety of a thunderclap. Flags, trumpets, an entourage of men with swords and very little empathy. But his steward, now he's always around. Tall, lean, fond of shouting and writing things down in a ledger the size of a roast pig. He keeps track of everything, your debts, your dues, your late harvests, the time your goat chewed his boot, and how many days of labor your family owes this season. You don't get to negotiate. This isn't a contract. It's tradition, written into law, carved into the manor's expectations, and reinforced by people with cudgels. Historians still argue whether medieval serfdom was a form of enslavement or just a particularly bleak tenant agreement. But to you, it doesn't matter. You know one thing, the more you give, the more is expected. Your home is your own, sort of. You built it. You maintain it. You patch the holes in the roof and scrub the soot off the hearth. But technically, if the Lord says move out, you move out. You sleep with one eye open during tax season and hope that your hens stay just plump enough to be useful but not so plump that someone decides to borrow them for the manor kitchen. Taxes are not always paid in coin. You might give 5 chickens, a dozen eggs, and a side of bacon just to avoid trouble. Occasionally, the tax collector accepts ale, which leads to a somewhat tipsy steward trying to tally your yearly grain production with a bit of charcoal and the wrong end of a stick. Still, there are tiny acts of resistance. You stash a few extra eggs in the hay. You hide a second jug of ale under the floorboards. You accidentally forget to report that one cow you helped deliver in the woods behind the mill. Everyone does it. It's the peasant version of offshore banking. And yet, there's a strange kind of pride in your life. You grow food from dirt. You survive winter. You carve spoons, mend shoes, and tell stories that stretch back generations. You know every tree, every dip in the land, every stream that only flows in spring. This world may not be yours in a legal sense, but it feels like yours in the only way that matters. And in some small mercies, your Lord knows it too. He doesn't want you dead, just barely alive and constantly working. It's in His best interest that you survive. After all, if you die, who's going to plant His barley? So, you work. You sweat. You age before your time. But you keep moving. And late at night, after the animals are asleep, the fire has burned low, and the stars peek through the thatch, you rest your weary bones and whisper curses the Lord will never hear. Maybe one day your children will have land of their own. Maybe. You rise before the sun again. The cockerel hasn't even cleared his throat, but already the sky holds that dim, blue promise of yet another long day. Your stomach mumbles something bitter, and you reply with a yawn, then pull on the same tunic you've worn for 3 days straight, because laundry is a luxury, and so is time. The fields call. Always the fields. You grab your hoe and your doubts and head toward the strip of land your family tends. It's not glamorous. It's not even good land, to be honest, just a narrow ridge carved into the communal field, marked by a wooden stake and a dispute over who planted the thistles last year. Welcome to the open field system, a great medieval idea if you enjoy endless bickering and neighborly passive aggression. Your strip is part of a long, shared patchwork. No fences. No hedges. Just narrow plots stretching like ribbons across the rolling landscape, and you're expected to know exactly which furrow belongs to whom. You remember because last year you accidentally hoed into your neighbor's barley row and ended up in a church-sponsored apology bake-off. You lost. Today is plowing day. And plowing means animals, oxen, if you're lucky, and if the neighbor remembered you were borrowing them. The beasts are big, slow, and about as enthusiastic as a teenager at Vespers. But they pull the heavy wooden plow through the soil like champions. Sort of. They also stop constantly to contemplate life or relieve themselves directly on your boots. Still, it's back-breaking work. You guide the plow with every muscle in your body, fighting roots, rocks, and the occasional sarcastic earthworm. The soil clings to your feet in wet clumps, and your hands develop a new appreciation for blisters. You might not be a poet, but you are definitely learning the language of pain. There's a rhythm to this life. Plow in spring. Sow soon after. Weed constantly. Pray for sun. Or rain. But not both. Definitely not hail. And if the wind sounds funny, hope it's not the kind of omen that makes old women clutch their rosaries and mutter about frogs falling from the sky. You plant barley, oats, rye, sometimes legumes like peas or beans. Vegetables and herbs go in the garden close to home, where they're safer from deer and overconfident pigs. Everything else gets thrown into the earth like a whispered bet, please grow. But even if you do everything right, it doesn't mean you'll eat. Because food disappears. Quickly. Some goes to the Lord as rent. Some you trade. Some you save in bins lined with straw, hoping the rats don't learn how to chew through lids. And some, inevitably, spoils before you even touch it. A decent harvest means survival. A bad one means, well, there's that one cousin you haven't seen since winter. You hope he moved. You really do. The line between comfort and catastrophe is razor thin. Historians still argue whether most peasants hovered near subsistence or occasionally reached surplus, but you know the answer in your bones. There are no extra years. There are just not terrible ones. And your tools? Don't even get started. They're basic. A hoe. A rake. A flail for threshing. The heavy wooden plow your oxen hate. Everything is handmade, repaired repeatedly, and oddly sentimental. Your hoe has more patches than your tunic, and you're genuinely fond of it. In harvest season, the pace turns frantic. Everyone works together. Even the kids. Especially the kids. You cut grain with sickles, tie it into bundles, stack it in sheaves, and haul it back on carts that wobble with every bump. It's exhausting, relentless, and vaguely satisfying, like winning a competition you didn't sign up for. Then comes threshing, where you beat the grain out of its husks with sticks, which feels a little bit like revenge. After that, winnowing, which involves tossing grain into the air so the wind can carry off the chaff. Pro tip: do this before dinner, or you'll find oat husks in your stew for a week. And speaking of stew, here's a fringe fact: some peasants used to bury their grain stores in sealed clay pots underground, hoping to keep them hidden from tax collectors and relatives. It's like a medieval savings account, except moldier. After harvest, you celebrate. Of course you do. The work is backbreaking, but it's also communal. There's singing. There's dancing. There's questionable mead. Someone inevitably loses a boot in the mud. Someone else kisses the wrong cousin. But always in the back of your mind, there's the math. Will this be enough? Will the grain last until spring? Can you feed your family, your ox, your pride? The Lord's reeve does his own counting. He appears at the edge of the field, puffed up like a goose in a feathered cap, scribbling on a wax tablet and announcing how much of your harvest is his. You nod. You don't argue. You can't. But inside, you silently deduct a few sheaves from his total. They're already under your bed, camouflaged as bedding. Quirky aside, one year, someone in the next village disguised sacks of flour as pillows and invented the great flower bed. It worked until his teenage son bragged about it in church. In winter, the fields sleep. And you dream. Not big dreams, just dry weather, healthy grain, maybe a sheep that doesn't escape every third Tuesday. Your body aches from months of stooping, lifting, praying. You become attuned to the land like it's your second skin. You don't own it. But it owns you. And as you stretch beside the fire, fingers still tingling with the phantom rhythm of scythe and flail, you realize something strange. Even through the hunger and the taxes and the calluses and the fact that your best pair of shoes is technically just 2 layers of hope stitched together, you made something grow. And in this world, that's everything. The wind has teeth tonight. It slides under the door, rattles the shutters, and finds the one gap in your blanket to breathe down your neck like a petty ghost. The fire's out. The goat's grumpy. And your stomach, which once again feels more decorative than functional, is practicing whale songs. It's the hungry gap. This cursed stretch between the end of winter and the start of spring is when everything starts running out. Grain bins echo when tapped. Onion strings dangle one sad bulb like a medieval ornament. The salted meat is either gone or suspiciously green. You chew slowly, not to savor, but to delay the moment when you realize that was the last crust of rye until the barley wakes up. The land is still asleep. Snow has melted, but the soil's too cold, too hard. Your hands itch to plant, but it's not time yet. If you sow too early, frost might snatch everything away. Too late, and the crops won't mature before harvest. It's a gamble, and the house always wins. Your body knows it, too. You feel slower. Lighter, but not in a fun way. Your belt cinches tighter. Your dreams start involving giant wheels of cheese rolling through flower-filled meadows. You wake up furious. This season has a name, that lean time, the hungry gap, but you just call it awful. There's nothing romantic about hunger. It pinches you awake at night. It makes you snap at your siblings. It makes the world look slightly more edible than it should. That straw? Chewy. Candle tallow? Questionable. Your mother, bless her, once tried boiling a leather strap into soup. It didn't work. But it softened your boots. Still, you adapt. You always do. You scrape like an off-tree bark. You gather wild sorrel, young nettles, dandelion leaves, anything green that hasn't been cursed by frost or peed on by passing livestock. Your fingers go red and raw from digging in frozen earth for turnips the rats forgot. There's a desperate sort of creativity to peasant cuisine in the Hungry Gap. Boiled acorns. Dried rose hips. Pine needle tea. One bold uncle once stewed moss and convinced everyone it was a northern recipe. No one believed him. But they still ate it. And then there's fasting. Not the holy kind. Though yes, Lent overlaps with this season and the church is very enthusiastic about giving up pleasures. But you're fasting? That's involuntary. There's nothing pious about skipping dinner because the pot is literally empty. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants were deeply spiritual or just cleverly timing their faith to crop cycles. You think it's a little of both. When the larder is empty and the church says, "Fast in the name of God," you shrug and say, "Already halfway there." Your Lord doesn't fast. He holds feasts. You hear the music from the manor wafting down the valley, pipes, lutes, laughter. You can smell the meat roasting. You know they're dancing on full stomachs. You stare at your cracked bowl of boiled nettle and feel the urge to throw a beat. But you don't. Because tomorrow might be worse. There's no harvest yet. No fruit, no fattened animals. The hens are still sluggish. The goats are moody. The cows look thinner than you. The earth hasn't come back to life. It's just waiting. Like all of you. Quirky tradition? In your village, people bury eggs near the edge of the field during the Hungry Gap to encourage fertility in the soil. You don't know if it works, but the foxes certainly appreciate it. One year, a fox dug up every egg, arranged them neatly by size, and left a chicken feather as payment. Probably a coincidence, but it did spark some odd religious commentary from the local priest. To get through it, you rely on community. Not the cheerful, everyone lends sugar kind. More the quiet, grim teamwork of let's not all die. Families share broth. Neighbors trade dried apples for onions. Someone finds a bag of ancient barley in the corner of a shed, and suddenly there's a line forming. There's also theft. Not proud theft, not malicious. Just desperation. A loaf left cooling unattended? Gone. A chicken that strays too far from the coop? Missing. People mutter, look the other way, and hope they're never hungry enough to do the same. And always, the children get fed first. Even if it's not much. You watch your mother scrape her bowl clean, then hand you the last spoonful and smile like her stomach isn't folding in on itself. That's what survival looks like here. Quiet sacrifice wrapped in a shawl. The Hungry Gap also brings sickness. Weak bodies catch colds. Minor cuts fester. A cough becomes a threat. You hear it in the night, someone hacking, someone shivering. There's no medicine beyond herbs and hope, and you already used the last of the dried mint when the goat got colic. So you wait. You wait for the first green shoots. For the snowdrops to bloom, for the elder trees to bud, for your neighbor to shout that he found mushrooms, safe ones. Hopefully, last year was awkward. You wait for the soil to soften, for the air to warm, for the sound of the bees. And eventually, the thaw arrives. The field gives a little. Just enough. You and your family go out together, hands trembling from weeks of weak meals, and press seeds into the damp ground. Every furrow is a prayer. Every planted bean is a promise you desperately hope the earth will keep. You won't know for weeks if they've taken root. But for now, there's the act of planting. The doing. The motion. It's something. Tonight, the wind is still cold, but there's birdsong at dusk, and that means everything. You sit by the fire, chew slowly, and imagine the coming days, shoots breaking soil, hens laying eggs, a stew with more than one ingredient. You're not there yet, but you're moving. And as your mother hums a soft tune no one remembers the words to, you rest your head on your arms and let your hunger fade, just for now. Tomorrow, you'll plant again. The sky turns black. Not nightfall, no. You're used to night. You embrace it, even. It wraps around your village like a wool cloak and comes with stars, owls, and the occasional drunk uncle singing to the moon. But this is something else. This is 1315. And the sky doesn't just darken, it broods. It presses down. Clouds roll in, thick and grey as wet sheep, and they stay. Days pass without sunlight. The rain starts as a whisper. Then a drizzle. Then a tantrum. By the end of the week, it's like the heavens have burst a pipe. You try to ignore it. At first, everyone does. Rain is normal. Mud is normal. Your boots always squelch and your tunic always smells vaguely of mildew. But this is more. This is rain that never stops. 3 days. 5 days. 10. The fields drown. The roads turn to soup. Your roof leaks constantly, even though you stuffed the holes with moss and your cousin's wedding shirt. People trudge around with straw hats sagging like wilted pancakes, trying to smile. But then the grain starts rotting in the ground. And that's when it shifts from annoying to terrifying. You planted in hope. Now the crops are a mess. Barley curls in on itself. Wheat lies flat in the mud like it's given up on ambition. Roots rot. Leaves blacken. You try to salvage what you can, pulling beets that look more like sickly turnips and turnips that look like regret. The rain keeps falling. Your food stores? Already low, thanks to the last hungry gap. And now the grain you counted on has either washed away or sprouted while still underground. That's not a good sign, historically speaking. Historians still argue whether this was Europe's worst agricultural disaster or just the most widespread, but to you, it feels like the apocalypse showed up in a soggy cloak and muddy boots. Animals start dying. The grass is too wet to graze. Hay turns to mold. Your neighbor's cow coughs itself to death in the middle of the night, and no one even jokes about stew. Even worse, the grain prices spike. Like, absurdly. What cost you 1 coin last season now costs 10. And the problem? You don't have 10. You barely have 1. The local reeve still expects rent, though. He arrives, cloak dripping, smile absent, to collect your dues. You offer him a sad sack of withered onions and a dead chicken. He accepts the onions. People begin to panic. Quietly, at first. The church says this is God's punishment, and sure, maybe. But for what, exactly? Being born? Eating? Sleeping in the same room as a pig? Honestly, that last one wasn't your idea. Rumors start. Whispers of entire villages with no food left. Of people collapsing in the fields. Of parents sending children away in hope someone else will feed them. And then, well, the other rumors begin. You hear of folks eating bark. Boiling shoes. One tale claims a woman roasted her husband's boots into jerky. Another, you don't repeat aloud. Just shake your head, stare at the grey sky, and try to will your stomach to stop yelling. You scavenge more than you farm now. Any mushroom, berry, or edible root becomes valuable. You dig up dandelions like they're gold. The hedgerows empty fast. Your stomach cramps become a normal part of life, like chores or itchy wool. And that's when people start eyeing each other strangely. Not like neighbors. Like options. You don't want to believe it, but it's in the air, the low muttering, the people who disappear overnight, the sudden silence from the next village over. No one talks about cannibalism. But no one doesn't not talk about it. Quirky side note? One old crone in your village swears that carrying a dried frog leg will keep famine spirits away. She wears 6, tied around her belt with a chicken bone wand. Everyone laughs. But not too hard. Just in case the frog legs are working. By midsummer, the graves start multiplying. Not from plague, not yet. Just starvation. People too weak to recover from a cold. Children who couldn't grow. Elders who went to sleep and didn't wake up. The churchyard fills. The priest tries to comfort people, but his hands tremble and his prayers feel thin in the damp air. The famine stretches into the next year. And then another. This isn't just one bad harvest. It's a pattern. The rains stop just long enough to give you hope, then start again like they're mocking you. Even the birds look thinner. You're not sure when you last saw a healthy cat. And still, somehow, life clings on. You trap a rabbit once, an actual rabbit, fat enough to feed the whole family. Your mother weeps while skinning it. You think about the stew for days before and days after. It's the first time in months your stomach doesn't growl all night. By 1317, the famine finally starts to ease. The skies begin to behave. The fields drain. You plant again, hands trembling, seeds pressed into soil like prayers into stone. And this time, things grow. Slowly. Cautiously. But they grow. You look thinner. Older. So does everyone else. You're not sure if you've grown taller or if your bones just got better at stretching the same skin. But you're still here. The famine didn't take you. Not this time. And as the first shoots break through the thawing ground, you bend close, whisper a thank you to the dirt, and pray this never happens again. It will. Just not yet. The well has gone quiet. It's early morning, and there's already a crowd forming around it, buckets in hand, faces drawn tight. Water shouldn't be scary, but lately, everything is. Yesterday, old Berta took a sip and collapsed. By nightfall, her skin was blotched, her breath wheezing. Now the whispers are growing louder, the water's gone bad. You don't have many choices. The well is the village's lifeblood. It's been here longer than your grandfather's memories, cold and deep and reliable. But when people start dying right after drinking from it, reliability doesn't matter much. Now every slurp tastes like a dare. A murmur spreads, someone poisoned the spring. No one knows who, of course. But that's never stopped anyone. A traveling peddler passed through 3 days ago, suspicious. The miller's wife hasn't been sick at all, too suspicious. And that hunchback goat-herder who talks to himself? Practically a confession. In times like these, logic melts faster than butter in a summer sun. The Lord's Reeve arrives to calm things down. He says the water's clean. Says the sickness is natural. Says we should all return to our normal duties and not panic. He says a lot of things, actually. But no one drinks until he drinks. And when he does, loudly, dramatically, one long gulp, he promptly throws up behind the alehouse. Coincidence? Possibly. Convincing? Not even close. You switch to ale. Everyone does. The weak stuff brewed at home, barely alcoholic but safer than water these days. Even babies sip it. It's warm, it's flat, and it smells faintly of damp socks, but no one's dying from it, yet. And that's how you live now, cautiously, suspiciously, one sip at a time. Historians still argue whether the well poisonings were real or imagined, whether it was bad luck, contaminated runoff, or just the first bite of a bigger plague on the way. But at the time, everyone's ready to accuse someone. Because if the water's poisoned, someone must have done it. And then someone remembers the leper. He lives in a hut outside the village, wrapped in rags, face hidden. Harmless, they said. Quiet. But now? Suspicious. Too quiet. His begging bowl's gone untouched since spring, and someone claims they saw him muttering over the well last week. Or was it the churchyard? Details are fuzzy when fear's involved. You watch from behind your mother's skirts as the crowd marches out to his hut. He doesn't answer their banging. Doesn't shout back. So someone kicks in the door. Inside, nothing. Just an empty bed of straw and a single sandal. That's enough evidence for most. Someone sets the hut on fire. Just to be safe. Fear's a funny thing. It doesn't burn out like the hut. It spreads. It seeps. Now, every sickness is a sign. A cough? Must be poison. A fever? The work of enemies. A boil? Witchcraft. Suddenly, you start eyeing your neighbor's herb garden like it's a crime scene. Quirky village belief? Some folks tie bits of iron to their water jugs, old nails, rusted keys, to weigh down the evil. Others float garlic on the surface. It doesn't help, but the smell does keep your little brother from stealing sips. The priest holds a mass for protection. Everyone attends, clutching rosaries and eyeing each other like suspects. He blesses the well. Sprinkles it with holy water. You try not to notice how ironic that feels. Still, the deaths slow down. Whether the sickness has passed or the paranoia just shifted, no one knows. The well starts to feel less like a trap and more like a reluctant friend. You still boil the water first, just in case. One evening, you see your father sitting by the bucket, staring into the dark water like it might answer back. He says nothing. Just sighs. Then dips in his cup, drinks, and mutters, "If it's my time, so be it." You don't know if that's bravery or just exhaustion. But then you start to notice the pattern. It wasn't the well, or the leper, or the goat herder, although he did steal your shoes once. It was the flooding. The constant rain from the famine years. The water soaked the land, the latrines overflowed, and human waste seeped where it shouldn't. Your village sits in a dip in the valley. It's beautiful. It's green. It's also a perfect bowl for collecting filth. The drainage ditches can't keep up. Everything mixes: rainwater, livestock droppings, chamber pots, spoiled food. It's not poison. It's bacteria. You won't have a word for that, not for centuries. But the idea starts to form. Clean water makes people better. Dirty water makes them worse. You begin to draw from a higher spring upstream, or catch rain in barrels. The priest suggests boiling everything. And for once, people actually listen. The fear fades. Slowly. The well becomes part of life again. You fill your bucket, glance down into the cold reflection, and pretend you don't remember last season. But you do. Every time someone coughs, you remember. Every time you pour a cup, you hesitate. But you drink anyway. Because you have to. Because thirst waits for no folklore. And somewhere deep in the soil, the water keeps moving. Always moving. You scratch at your neck. Again. It started as a little itch, a tiny bite you blamed on fleas or maybe that suspicious hay pile you napped in last week. But now it's red. Angry. Hot. And a weight. Is that a lump? It is. Right under your arm, hard and growing. Like a small egg, except it hurts when you move and pulses like it has its own opinion about your survival. Your mother notices. She doesn't say anything at first, just stares too long, her mouth pressed into a tight line. Then she turns and mutters something about Saint Sebastian and starts boiling water. Not that boiling water ever fixed a lump, but it's what you do. You've heard the whispers. Everyone has. There's something going around. Something bad. People drop suddenly, healthy one morning, cold by nightfall. Fevers that come fast, wild-eyed. Skin that purples, boils that burst and ooze. Whole families disappear behind locked doors. The bell tolls more than it used to. You stopped counting how many times. It has a name now, spoken in half-whispers and with eyes on the sky, the pestilence. Others just call it the Great Death. Fitting. You try not to think about it, but it's hard when the village changes overnight. No one visits anymore. No one shares food. The markets are silent. The baker boards up his stall. The church is nearly empty, even the priest has started coughing, and everyone's pretending not to notice. You stay inside. You boil herbs, burn rosemary, and hang garlic from the rafters. Your little brother starts wearing a cloth soaked in vinegar around his neck like it's magical armor. You copy him. Desperate times call for desperate smells. Historians still argue whether the Black Death was carried by fleas, airborne, or some terrifying combination of both. But here in your home, you don't need theories. You need answers. Fast. Let's be honest, your hygiene habits aren't exactly ideal. You bathe once a season, maybe. You share clothes. Your home is crowded with humans and livestock. And if you so much as sneeze in public now, someone starts crossing themselves and looking for holy water. You remember a merchant once bragging that the plague came from far-off lands, somewhere east of everything, where the rats were as big as dogs and the wind carried sickness like song. You didn't believe him then. You'd like to punch him now. The streets stink. More than usual. There are carts. Wooden ones. They rumble through the village slowly, filled with limp bodies wrapped in cloth, their faces hidden. Sometimes you hear crying. Sometimes you hear nothing at all. Just the creak of wheels and the flies buzzing like little reminders. And still, the lump under your arm grows. Your mother won't let anyone touch it. She wraps you in rags soaked in vinegar and chews on feverfew like it's going to fight off death. She prays louder than usual. She sings lullabies you haven't heard since you were 3. It's oddly comforting and deeply worrying. Your fever spikes. The world tilts. Sometimes you see your grandmother, even though she died last spring. She sits beside your bed, hums softly, pats your hand. Either she's a ghost, or your brain's cooking. You sweat. You shake. You mumble nonsense. Your brother starts sleeping outside, just in case you start glowing or floating. Then, miraculously, you stop getting worse. You don't get better, not yet. But the fever breaks. The lump softens. The worst passes. You can sit up. Sip ale. Mutter sarcastic things again. Your mother weeps quietly and starts scrubbing everything with vinegar like she's trying to erase the air. Most aren't as lucky. The baker's wife is gone. So is the blacksmith and his entire family. The reeve has stopped visiting. The Lord himself has left the manor, off to the countryside, they say. A cleaner place, with fewer peasants and more prayer. Quirky belief of the week? Someone tries stuffing lavender into dead fish and hanging them from doorposts to absorb the plague. It doesn't help. It does attract every cat in the village. More bodies pile up. The graveyard overflows. New ones are dug, hastily, shallowly. You help, once you're strong enough. No one asks you to. There just aren't enough hands anymore. And the worst part? You start recognizing the smell. It's unforgettable. Sweet and sour. Like rotting fruit and old blood and heartbreak. You scrub your clothes with ashes and lie, but it sticks. It follows. It lingers. Everyone walks differently now. Quiet, hunched, cautious. People avoid eye contact. Laughter is rare. Jokes feel wrong. The world feels like it's holding its breath. But some keep going. They light candles. They feed the goats. They bake bread again. Quietly. Carefully. They nod to you on the road and keep walking. You survived. Somehow. And now, when you walk the village paths, you see it differently. Every door is a memory. Every empty house is a name you won't forget. Every cold patch of earth in the graveyard is someone's everything. Historians will write about the plague, debate its origins, its methods, its mortality rate. But you? You'll remember the way the sky looked that summer. How quiet the church got. The bitter taste of fever. The echo of wheels over stone. And that lump? Gone now. But the scar remains. The cart creaks louder than usual this morning. It rolls slowly down the village path, wheels thudding over each cobble like a heartbeat gone wrong. No horses. Just two grim men pulling it by hand, one silent, the other muttering a prayer you don't recognize. They are not from here. No one knows their names. No one asks. The cart is already half full. You know what that means. A body lies at the top, wrapped in a torn blanket, one foot poking out, toes curled like they were mid-step when it happened. There's no ceremony. No eulogy. Just a pause outside each home and a soft call, bring out your dead. You hate that phrase now. The first time they came, people cried. Now they don't. The sobbing has given way to silence, a kind of hollow stillness that feels louder than weeping ever could. People carry loved ones to the cart with vacant eyes and trembling arms, as if sleepwalking through grief. Your neighbor, the old woman who gave you cheese curd on your birthday, she's in the cart today. So is the shepherd's wife. So is someone you can't quite recognize, their face half covered, but the boots are familiar. You feel a twist in your chest and turn away before it becomes too much. These men, these cart pullers, they're not cruel. They're just efficient. No time for sentiment when death has a schedule. They don't wait long at each door. They don't speak unless they have to. They just take the bodies and move on. The cart groans. The flies follow. The church bell rings once, half-heartedly. The priest is still sick. The mass is rushed. The graves are shallow. Sometimes they don't even dig. Just burn. There's not enough holy ground. Not enough time. Not enough hands. You help when you can. It feels important. It feels human. You grab a spade and help dig in the meadow behind the church, now an unofficial burial field. No markers. No names. Just rows of disturbed earth, packed tight and blessed fast. The first time you help carry a body, your arms go numb. It's your cousin. You hadn't seen her in weeks, figured she'd fled to her uncle's farm up north. But no, she's here, pale and curled like a question mark in a linen shroud. You swallow hard, clench your jaw, and help lower her into the grave. You don't cry until that night, after everyone else is asleep. Historians still argue whether the death carts were universal or exaggerated by later writers, but to you, they're as real as frostbite. As real as the empty houses and shuttered windows and howling dogs no one's fed in days. You learn how to prepare bodies. Not because you want to. Because you have to. You wrap them in cloth, tie the limbs, place herbs in the folds if you have any left. Sage, rosemary, sometimes just dried grass. Anything to dull the smell. You grow used to the touch of cold skin. You learn to breathe through your mouth. And sometimes, rarely, you whisper a name. Just to remember they were more than this. More than another number in a plague year. A quirky old tradition reappears, laying coins on the eyes of the dead. Some say it's for the ferryman. Others say it keeps the spirit from wandering back. You find it comforting either way. You save 2 coins under your mattress, just in case. Your hands grow calloused from digging. Your back aches. Your heart does stranger things, beats too fast, or not at all, or suddenly remembers a laugh you heard once and twists itself into a knot. Still, you go on. The cart comes every other day now. Less frequent. Either there are fewer dead or fewer people left to notice. The wind carries less stench. The churchyard is still, for once. One morning, the cart passes your house without stopping. You exhale so deeply it feels like a confession. Later, you hear a baby cry. A new baby. Born in the plague's shadow but alive, squalling and furious and undeniably real. You smile. You're not sure why. But it feels like a beginning, somehow. Life sneaks back in slowly. The fields are choked with weeds, but you see a few villagers clearing them. Someone lights the bake oven again. Children play in the mud, not laughing, not yet, but running. Moving. And that counts for something. The death cart becomes less frequent. The strangers pulling it start skipping homes. One day, they don't show up at all. And no one complains. Quieter burials take their place, family only, private, a spade passed from hand to hand with no words. You help with those, too. It's not just duty anymore. It's habit. It's honor. It's how you say goodbye in a world that doesn't always allow time for goodbyes. You don't forget. You can't. The sound of those cartwheels still lives in your ears. That lurching creak. That rhythmic rumble. Every time a wagon passes now, you flinch. But you also carry the memory of faces, of names, of moments. You remember the baker's whistle, the shepherd's jokes, your cousin's crooked grin. They were more than bodies. They were your world. And somehow, despite everything, you're still part of it. Still here. Still walking. Still breathing. You clutch a tooth. No, not yours. Not yet, anyway. This one supposedly from St. Mary herself, though you have doubts. It looks suspiciously like a sheep molar, and the man who sold it to you also tried to pass off a chicken feather as part of the Archangel Gabriel's wing. Still, desperate times make strange collectors, and right now, you'll take any edge you can get. Everyone's looking for protection. The plague isn't just a disease, it's a spiritual reckoning. Or so you're told. So you do what everyone does when reason breaks down. You turn to magic, miracles, and the suspicious guy selling relics out of a wheelbarrow. You hang charms over the door. You carry bits of parchment inscribed with Latin prayers. You wear a bag of crushed rose petals, dried frog bits, and a splinter of wood labeled definitely from the true cross. Sure. Why not? Your neighbors are no better. One woman refuses to eat unless her food has been sprinkled with holy ash from the church hearth. Another insists on spinning 3 times before entering her house, muttering a spell that sounds like a hiccup. Your cousin sleeps with garlic stuffed in his ears. He says it keeps the pestilence out. You say it just keeps you out. The church has advice, too. So much advice. Pray. Confess. Fast. Whip yourself if you must. God is angry, clearly, and only your suffering will make things right again. Which seems unfair, considering you didn't start the plague. So you visit the shrine of Saint Sebastian, patron saint of plague victims and pin cushions. You light a candle. You kneel. You mumble your best "please don't let me die" prayer and toss in a coin you really can't afford to spare. Historians still argue whether faith actually protected people or just gave them something to hold on to. You don't care. You want something to do. Anything. Because sitting still, waiting for death to notice you, is worse than the fear itself. Quirky fact? There's a woman 3 villages over who swears that bathing in crushed snails and goat milk saved her from the pestilence. She now sells snail soap at market. It smells exactly as you'd expect. She's also the only one in her household who hasn't caught the plague, so now everyone's rubbing themselves in gastropod lotion like it's holy water. You're skeptical. But your mother starts collecting snails anyway. And then there's the talismans. Smooth stones, braided hair, rabbit's feet, feathers wrapped in cloth. You keep one tucked in your sleeve, a tiny clay token shaped like an eye. Your uncle carved it for protection. You want to believe it works, even though the last time he carved one, it cracked clean in half after a week. Still, it's better than nothing. One day, a stranger arrives, dirty, wild-eyed, barefoot. He stands in the village square holding a painted board covered in saints and scrawled warnings. "Repent," he says. "Repent or burn." You suspect he's just hungry, but your neighbors listen. Some follow him when he leaves, chanting and weeping, flagellants in homemade robes, marching to who knows where. They never return. The priest tries to reassure everyone. He holds mass every day now, though his voice is thin and his hands shake. He offers communion with a trembling smile and enough incense to choke the angels. People come, kneel, cry, whisper confession so long he has to sit down. You stop going after a while. Not because you've lost faith, but because you're tired of being afraid in public. Instead, you turn inward. You talk to your family. You sit by the fire and retell the old stories. You burn rosemary. You hang iron shears over the door. You recite your own little ritual each night before sleep, just in case the plague is listening. And slowly, something shifts. It's not that you stop believing. It's that belief changes shape. Becomes more personal. Less about fear, more about comfort. Less about grand cathedrals, more about small moments, a song hummed in the dark, a warm bowl of broth, a whispered prayer over the feet of the dying. One night, your brother places his St. Mary tooth next to yours on the hearthstone. Just in case. He tells you it's glowing slightly. You tell him it's probably the firelight. But you both leave it there anyway. The next morning, no one in your household is sick. Coincidence? Maybe. Miracle? Could be. You don't question it. You just keep moving forward, pocketing faith like breadcrumbs through a dark wood. A relic here. A prayer there. A charm worn thin from constant rubbing. It's not about superstition anymore. It's about survival. You're in a field, barefoot, smacking yourself with a stick. No, you're not hallucinating. You're a flagellant now, at least for the next 2 days or until your back gives out. The pain is supposed to help. Supposed to show God you're sorry for everything. Supposed to cleanse the world through blood and repentance. Honestly, you're mostly just cold, bruised, and regretting breakfast. The procession stretches down the dirt road, men in ragged white robes, chanting hymns, barefoot in the frost, and lashing their backs with knotted cords as they go. The rhythm is hypnotic. Swish-thwack. Swish-thwack. The sound of sin being scrubbed out, apparently. You joined out of fear, like most people. The plague has worn your nerves to nubs. The church says pray. The nobles say pay. But these people? They say do something. And so, here you are, marching through mud, bleeding for salvation. The townspeople watch in silence. Some cry. Some drop to their knees. Others mutter that this is madness. You think maybe all three are correct. Your back stings. Welts rise. Your feet are numb. Someone in front of you collapses, and 2 others step over him like it's part of the routine. You wonder if this is what hope looks like now, a line of self-inflicted misery stretching toward the horizon. But for some, it works. Or seems to. A village the group passed through last week hasn't reported new plague cases. Coincidence? Maybe. A miracle? Depends who you ask. Historians still argue whether the flagellant slowed the plague or made things worse by spreading it town to town. But in the moment, you're just grateful to feel anything other than dread. Pain is something you can control. Mostly. Not everyone's convinced, though. The church, in particular, is getting twitchy. They start cracking down, muttering about heresy and improper theology. Apparently, if anyone's going to inspire mass public agony, it should be approved agony. Preferably in Latin. Back in your village, the atmosphere is thick, almost sticky. People have started burning herbs day and night, thick clouds of smoke rolling through the lanes like protective fog. They believe the pestilence travels through bad air, and maybe it does. You've heard the word miasma whispered, the idea that smells and invisible vapors carry death. So now everything smells. Not in the usual way, goats and onions and wet wool, but in a pungent, over-perfumed, nasal assault kind of way. Lavender. Juniper. Vinegar. Burning feathers. One neighbor walks around with a sponge tied to his nose, soaked in mint and wine. It works great until he sneezes and the whole thing flings off into a beehive. You try it too. You stuff your nostrils with dried sage and thyme. It doesn't stop the plague, but it does stop you from being invited to family meals. Another neighbor keeps a fire smoldering in each room, believing it cleanses the air. Her house is now half soot, half smoking hazard. But she hasn't gotten sick. Yet. So people start copying her. One evening, half the village smells like smoked cheese. Quirky coping method of the week? Someone starts hanging dried orange peels and crushed beetles in bundles over their doorframe. They say it wards off the bad breath of death. You think that's oddly poetic. And also probably invented 5 minutes ago. The village physician, if you can call him that, suggests bloodletting again. His favorite solution for everything from coughs to heartbreak. He offers to lance your armpit swelling with a rusty knife. You politely decline and go back to boiling garlic water. You hear of wealthier townsfolk using plague doctor masks, those strange, long-nosed bird-like beaks stuffed with herbs. You've never seen one in person. Rumor has it the Lord Steward tried wearing one but got stuck in a doorway and panicked so badly he knocked over 3 chamber pots. It's hard to know what's working. The plague ebbs and flows, striking one house but skipping the next. Sometimes it hits the rich. Sometimes the beggars. Sometimes no one. People cry miracle one week, curse their luck the next. You start marking days on the wall, just to prove you're still here. You survive on habits. Burn herbs. Swish vinegar. Mutter prayers. Tap your St. Mary tooth before sleep. Sometimes you feel silly. Sometimes you feel desperate. Often both. You go back to the fields. Carefully. The land doesn't care about plague. It still wants planting. The cows still want milking. Life doesn't stop. It limps, gasps, crawls, but it moves. And every once in a while, there's laughter. Honest, gasping, belly-shaking laughter. Someone slips in a puddle. Someone farts mid-prayer. Someone claims they've cured the plague by eating only garlic and gooseberries, and now their breath has driven the pestilence off entirely. You laugh too. Because if you don't, the silence wins. And when the flagellants pass through again, fewer this time, you don't join. You watch. You nod. You respect the pain. But you stay home. Because you've found your own rituals now. They're smaller. Quieter. Less dramatic. But they're yours. And that feels like power. You wake to silence. Not the gentle, sleepy kind where birds chirp and wind rustles the thatch. No, this is thick silence, dense, eerie, as if even the rats are holding their breath. It takes a moment before you realize what's missing. The church bell. It hasn't rung. Not for morning prayers. Not for matins. Not even to mark the hours, and it always rings. It's the heartbeat of your village. Its absence is like missing a step and tumbling into a hole where certainty used to be. You pull on your tunic and step outside, blinking in the weak morning light. A few neighbors do the same, their faces drawn, eyes flicking toward the chapel's crooked steeple like it might suddenly speak up and explain itself. But it doesn't. It just sits there. Quiet. Closed. You shuffle toward it with the others. No one talks. No one has to. You push open the heavy wooden door, and the smell hits you first, stale incense, musty robes, and something darker underneath. You find the priest in the choir stall, head bowed, hands still folded in prayer. But he's not praying anymore. He's gone. No priest. No last rites. No communion. No confession. Just the empty echo of an altar left unattended and the cold realization that your spiritual lifeline has snapped. Historians still argue whether clergy fled or perished more often during the Black Death. Some stayed. Some didn't. Some died trying. But for your village, it doesn't matter. He was the only one. And now you have no one to shepherd the souls of the dying. You all stand there, unsure what to do. The altar candles have burned down to stubs. The book of hours lies open to yesterday. A rat scuttles past the pews, as if to remind you the world continues with or without your liturgies. One neighbor, Marta, the midwife, steps forward, crosses herself, and begins to pray. Soft at first, but firm. A Latin hymn, half remembered but full of meaning. Others join in. Off-key, uncertain, but desperate for something, anything, to make it feel less final. You don't know all the words, but you hum along. You light a candle. You kneel where the priest would have stood, just for a moment, and say your own awkward prayer. It isn't fancy. You just say, please. Let this stop. That night, you and your mother sit by the hearth, discussing what to do. Someone has to take over funerals. There's still death, after all, and now no one to guide the souls. So, your family volunteers. Not because you're holy. Just because someone has to. You start performing simple rites, wash the bodies, wrap them in clean cloth, say a few words. At first, you follow the priest's rituals as best you remember. A psalm here. A cross drawn in the air. You do your best. People cry anyway. Sometimes harder than when the priest did it. You don't tell them this, but the first time you anoint someone with oil, you use lamp oil by mistake. No one notices. It still smells vaguely sanctified. It becomes routine. You find the church key under the priest's mattress. You sweep the nave. You light incense, even if it smells like burning cabbage. You toll the bell, your arms trembling from the weight of it, but the sound booms out over the valley like an old promise reawakened. Your little brother starts calling you for father. Joking, of course. But sometimes, people do look at you differently. Not quite a priest, but not just a farmer anymore, either. You lead prayers. You deliver small sermons. You tell stories from memory, the loaves and fishes, the blind man healed, that one about the lion who converted. You might mix up the details, but the message lands. Faith doesn't need a collar. It just needs someone to say, we're not alone. The church becomes strange now, less sacred, more lived in. It smells of smoke and straw. The pews creak with new weight. Children nap on the benches. A goat sneaks in once and is swiftly canonized by your cousin as Saint Hornicus. You don't correct him. Quirky fact? Someone starts leaving small offerings on the altar. Not coins, but things they have, a feather, a ribbon, a smooth rock. One child places a dried apple, and by the next day, it's gone. You like to imagine the priest returned for a snack. You find a kind of peace in the rhythm. You wash, you pray, you bury. You listen to people's confessions, though you never offer absolution. Just a nod. Sometimes that's enough. But the lines between holy and ordinary blur. One day, your friend Marek comes to you and asks if you'll marry him to his betrothed. You panic slightly, flip through the missal, and decide, why not? So, in the middle of a field, wearing a tunic stained with soot, you officiate their union with a garland and a prayer. They kiss. Everyone claps. You serve oat cakes. It's the happiest moment the village has seen in months. Faith, it turns out, is flexible. It bends. It leans. It wobbles like a wagon with one short wheel. But it doesn't break, not if people hold it together. Historians still debate whether the loss of clergy led to a spiritual crisis or a religious awakening. You'd say, both. You miss the priest. But you've also never felt more needed. Or more connected. You're not a saint. You still stub your toe and shout things inappropriately. you still sneak extra porridge. But when someone knocks on your door at dusk, asking for a blessing over a dying grandmother, you go. Because no one else will. And because somehow, along the way, you became the thread holding something sacred together. The smoke still lingers in the air. You'd think by now it would have cleared, after all the fires, the funerals, the incense, the torchlit processions. But there's something about plague smoke that sticks to everything, the walls, the blankets, even your memories. You wrinkle your nose, but you're used to it now. You're used to a lot of things. And yet, one morning, you hear something you haven't heard in months. A hoe striking soil. That steady thunk of wood and stone meeting dirt. It echoes like a heartbeat returning after a long, fevered silence. You look outside, and sure enough, your neighbor is back in the fields. She's wrapped in a patched cloak, her shoulders hunched, but her hands move with quiet certainty. Planting. Plowing. Living. You feel it then, not joy, exactly. Not relief. Just motion. The slow turning of a great wheel that had seemed stuck forever. You pick up your own hoe, heavy from disuse, and head out. The fields look rough. Overgrown. Patches of wild weeds have taken over furrows that once grew barley. Crows circle above, looking offended that you're back. One even caws at you like, "Oh, you again." You ignore it. You press the blade into the earth, and for the first time in what feels like centuries, the soil yields. Damp. Rich. Ready. It feels like a conversation. "Hey, I'm still here." Same. You're not alone. Others trickle out. The village looks like a ghost town at first glance, but doors start opening. Faces peer out, older, thinner, but alive. A few children kick a pig bladder down the lane, laughing weakly. Someone sings as they mend a roof. It's off-key. It's beautiful. The plague has taken so much. Too much. But it didn't take everyone. And that changes everything. You till the land with fresh caution. Every move is slower now. Deliberate. Like a person who's touched fire and remembers the burn. You know how fragile it all is. One bad wind, one sickness, and the whole thing can unravel again. But you plant anyway. Grain. Beans. Turnips. Whatever seeds you can find. People swap and share like never before. The widow who used to hoard lentils is now giving them out with a shrug. The grumpy old shepherd lets kids help him herd. Even the lord, who has finally slinked back to his manor, sends down bags of barley and says they're gifts. No one believes him. But no one turns them down either. Historians still argue whether the post-plague years were a time of opportunity or just slower suffering. But from where you stand, knee-deep in mud and hope, you know it's both. Survival doesn't come with a victory parade. It comes with calloused hands and cautious optimism. The best part? There's space now. Literally. The fields are roomier. Fewer mouths to feed, more land to till. You expand into a patch that once belonged to a cousin who didn't make it. You say his name as you dig, softly, so the soil knows whose shoes you're filling. And wages? Well, for the first time in your life, you matter. The Lord needs workers. So do the merchants. So does everyone, really. And there just aren't enough hands. Which means they come to you. Asking. Offering payment. Real coin. You can barely believe it. You, who used to work for a handful of onions and a firm lecture, now have leverage. You take a job helping rebuild the mill. The pay? 3 whole pence a day and lunch. You nearly faint. You don't get cocky. You still till your own strip of land. Still patch your clothes. Still check the churchyard for new graves every week, just in case the plague decides to do an encore. But for the first time, you start to think ahead. Not just to next season. To next year. To planting more. To storing better. To dreaming, just a little. A quirky superstition returns, one you hadn't heard since childhood, burying a coin under the first furrow for good luck. You do it. Not because you believe it'll work, but because it feels like a ritual worth reviving. A small gesture that says, I'm still here, and I believe in tomorrow. The animals return too. Chickens cluck in the lanes again. Sheep bleat on the hill. Even the goat seems slightly less chaotic, though that might just be wishful thinking. You name one of the new kids Hope. The name doesn't stick. He ends up being called Stomp after he ruins your root cellar. At night, you sit by the hearth and feel quiet. Not the plague silence. The other kind. The good kind. The kind that says the worst has passed. Your mother hums again while mending clothes. Your brother carves wooden spoons for market. Your sister insists the clouds look like angels. Maybe they do. You visit the church, cleaned now, the candles lit again. The new priest is younger, nervous, and prone to losing his place in sermons. But he tries. He listens. He lets you toll the bell sometimes. It still takes 2 hands. You light a candle for the ones who didn't make it. You whisper their names. You keep going. Because the ground is ready. Because you're still breathing. Because some part of you refuses to stay buried. You're offered a penny. Just like that. Out in the open. In broad daylight. No threats. No corvée duties tacked to it. Just coin, for work. You blink at the steward, half expecting him to pull it back and laugh. But he's dead serious. He needs someone to help repair the Lord's sheep pen. You, specifically. Because you're healthy, strong, and still have all your fingers, which puts you in rare company these days. And he's not alone. Suddenly, everyone's offering coin for labor. The reeve, the manor, even that traveling merchant with a smirk and a mole shaped like a teardrop. They all need hands. Because so many hands are gone. It's 1,350 something now, and the plague didn't just take your neighbors. It took the labor force. Now you are the most valuable thing on the manor. You, with your calloused palms and muddy boots. Your ability to swing a scythe, dig a ditch, plough a field. It's like someone finally realized peasants don't grow on trees. You accept the job. Of course you do. 1 penny might not sound like much, but it jingles. It shines. It smells like possibility and e-metal. But mostly possibility. And soon after, someone else offers you 2. Your eyebrows nearly hit your hairline. 2 pence? For 1 day? That's bordering on lordly pay, at least by your humble, cabbage-centered standards. You're not alone. Other peasants get offers. Wages creep higher. Field work now comes with perks, meals, ale, even a goat once, though the goat turned out to be unhinged and bit the steward's beard clean off. Historians still argue whether the labor shortage truly empowered peasants or just temporarily rattled the nobility's confidence. But down here, with dirt under your nails and silver in your pocket, it feels real. You feel wanted. Not by the heavens, not by death, but by life, messy, sweaty, back-aching life. Your old lord isn't pleased. he tries to enforce old rules. No leaving the manor. No bargaining. No wandering serf behavior, as he puts it. But you've seen things. You've survived things. A man who watched a third of his village die doesn't flinch at a wagging finger and a threat of the stocks. Still, the king issues a law, the Statute of Laborers. Basically, it says, stop asking for higher wages, you ungrateful muddy creatures. You laugh when you hear about it. And then you ignore it. Because they need you now. You start choosing your work. Not just accepting it. You weigh offers. You haggle. You get selective. You decide the thatching job is too itchy, but you'll take the orchard pruning. Better view. Fewer wasps. One day, you walk past your old plough and feel different. Not above it, not ungrateful. Just aware that for the first time, you can step away from it if you want. Not forever. But a little. With coin in your pouch, you visit the market. Not to sell. To buy. Bread you didn't bake. A sausage so peppery it makes your eyes water. A bit of dyed wool that your sister turns into a new cap. It's misshapen. Hideous. You wear it every day. You start to imagine bigger things. Land of your own. A home outside the manor's reach. Maybe even sending your child to a monastery school, not for the books, but for the meals. You hear stories of entire villages where peasants fled and took over abandoned land. Places with no lord, no taxes. Just shared work and quiet freedom. Sounds made up. Sounds like heaven. But part of you wonders. The manor court still operates, but fewer people show up. The steward writes furiously in his big book, trying to pretend the world hasn't changed, but it has. Even he knows it. He lowers his eyes now when he talks to you. He doesn't bark. He asks. One afternoon, you get an offer from a distant estate. They're rebuilding, desperate for workers. They promise triple pay and a warm bed in the barn. You hesitate. You've lived your whole life here. Your parents, your grandparents, your hedgehog named Gerald, this place is in your bones. But so is hunger. So is memory. So is a flickering candle that says, you don't owe this land everything. So you go. Just for a season, you tell yourself. To earn, to learn, to see. You walk with a small sack over your shoulder, a charm around your neck, and more confidence than you've ever felt. The new manor is strange, cleaner, somehow. The lord is young and awkward and tries to say hello in your dialect but calls your boots barn shoes. Still, he pays fair. Gives good meals. Lets you sit by the fire when you work late. You help build a new granary. Plant fresh fields. The air smells like wet pine and promise. You write home, well, dictate to the reeve, who grudgingly scratches it out. You send coin. And when you return, 3 months later, your family greets you like a knight returning from battle. You even brought dried figs. Quirky village reaction? Your aunt assumes you're now practically nobility and insists you bless her chickens. You don't, but you do throw them some grain and tell them they look radiant. Life has changed. You're still a peasant, but no longer just a shadow in the field. You have a say, a voice, a worth. And though you still sleep in a thatched hut, it now smells faintly of new leather and freedom. It starts over a mug of warm ale and a whisper. You're at the village tavern, or what passes for one, a crooked timber shack with 3 stools, 1 goat, an ale that tastes suspiciously like regret. The fire crackles. The air is thick with the scent of damp wool and roasted onions. Someone plays a tune on a fiddle with only 2 strings. Someone else snores. And then you hear it. He says no more tithes. You glance over. The speaker is a stranger. Or at least, not your stranger. He's got calloused hands and a cloak too nice for someone this dusty. He leans in close, voice low but urgent. A preacher. John Ball. Says we were made equal. That God never intended lords and serfs. That we've lived under a lie. You blink. Then laugh. Then stop laughing. Because other people aren't laughing. They're listening. And slowly, over days, the whispers multiply. They come from merchants, minstrels, wandering workers. They carry ideas like sparks in dry grass. No more taxes. No more forced labor. No more lords. You've heard dreams before. But this feels different. This feels possible. The plague shattered the old order. The labor shortage cracked the walls. And now, people are looking at those cracks and wondering, why not push? You start gathering around fires, at wells, behind hedgerows. Not openly, yet. But often. The talk circles like hawks. What Tyler, John Ball, the dream of a world where no one owns your sweat but you. Historians still argue whether these talks were spontaneous or organized, whether it was all planned or just a fevered dream born from hunger and rage. But to you, it feels like waking up. Like you've been sleeping in chains you thought were part of your bones, and suddenly realizing they're just ropes you could untie. Even the church isn't safe from criticism now. After the plague, people noticed which clergy fled and which stayed. They remember the priest who charged double for last rites. They remember the fat bishop who demanded alms while sipping imported wine. And they talk. You begin to imagine it, a life without dues, without kneeling for someone else's dinner scraps. Your family with land. Your children free to choose work, not be assigned it. It's dangerous thinking. But it's growing. The tavern whispers turn into songs. One night, someone starts chanting a rhyme. When Adam delved and Eve span. Who was then the gentleman? It hits like thunder. So simple. So sharp. You repeat it to yourself on the walk home. Over and over. The Lord must sense the mood. He begins acting twitchy. Starts reinforcing the man offenses. Increases the fines for tiny infractions, like using the common pasture too early, or letting your pig wander near the church door, which, to be fair, was hilarious. One day, you overhear the steward say, they'll remember their place soon enough. That's the last straw. Because you've seen your place. It's in the mud, under someone's boot, next to your cousin who died from hunger. And you've survived it. You want more. And so, one morning, a messenger arrives, a call to gather. In Kent. A march to London. What Tyler will lead. John Ball will preach. The king will listen. Change is coming. You look at your father. Your brother. Even your mother, who still believes you can sweep away injustice with a strong enough broom. No one says anything. But the next day, you pack your cloak, a crust of bread, and a knife, and go. The road is muddy. Long. But the marchers are many. Hundreds. Then thousands. Men, women, even children, all walking with purpose. You've never seen such a sight. Peasants singing, chanting, holding tools like weapons and banners like truth. Quirky little fact. Someone paints a goose in bright red and names it rebellion. It marches 3 full days before getting distracted by a puddle and joining another group. You wish it well. The mood is electric. Hopeful. But tense. You're not naive. You know lords don't give up power with a smile and a handshake. But you also know they can't ignore this. You reach London. You surround it. You make your demands. End serfdom. Fair wages. Equal laws. No more forced labor. And, most shocking of all, you're heard. King Richard, just a boy, meets the rebels. Promises are made. Charters are signed. People cheer. It feels like the world is bending toward justice. Then Wat Tyler is killed. Just like that. Cut down during talks. Treachery. Panic. The mood sours. The king stalls. The army moves in. Rebels scatter. You run. You run harder than you ever have. Through alleyways. Through mud. Through your own disbelief. You make it home, barely. The rebellion is crushed. The leaders hanged. The promises burned. But here's the thing. Something changed anyway. Even as they punish and fine and scold, they know the truth. You're not as scared anymore. None of you are. You might kneel. But only when you choose to. Your pitchfork is older than you are. The wood's been replaced twice, and the iron tines are slightly bent from that time you fended off an overly amorous goose, but it's reliable. It's not a weapon. It's not supposed to be. But today, it is. You grip it tighter as the crowd gathers. Dozens of peasants from your village and the next, stomping across the frozen fields with farm tools and fury. Someone's brought a hoe. Someone else has a cooking pan tied to a stick. Not exactly a fearsome army, but you're not here to impress. You're here because you're done. Done with rising taxes. Done with broken promises. Done with the Lord's tax collector arriving yesterday, grinning like a smug ferret and demanding payment for your brother, who died last spring. That was it. The final insult. You followed the rebellion to London. You saw the glimmer of hope, and you watched it die with Wat Tyler. But the spirit didn't die. Not in you. Not in anyone here. So today, you march on your own manor house. You're not exactly sure what happens next. The crowd mutters and swells, like a pot about to boil. People shout slogans, some borrowed from the rebels, others made up on the spot. One woman waves a pair of the steward's trousers she borrowed from the laundry line. It's weirdly inspiring. You reach the gates. They're closed. Of course they are. You knock. Once. Twice. Then someone throws a stone. It sails through the air, hits the wooden door with a thwack, and everything breaks loose. The crowd surges. You don't remember deciding to push. You just move. Shouts rise. Feet stomp. A pitchfork jabs the lock. A hammer slams it. And then, crack. The gate breaks. You flood in. You've never been inside the manor proper. Not like this. It's grander than you expected, and more fragile. The tapestries are damp. The furniture looks unimpressive. The steward tries to speak, but someone dunks him in the water trough before he finishes the word obedience. You don't hurt anyone. You just take things back. Grain. Tools. The taxes he collected from your father last month, tucked neatly into a chest beside a mostly full bottle of imported wine. You spill the wine on principle. Then you burn the list. The one with all your names. Who owes what? Who worked where? Who's bound to whom? You watch the parchment curl and blacken in the fire. It smells like freedom and ink. But freedom doesn't last. By evening, word spreads that soldiers are coming. Royal men. Real weapons. Real consequences. You run. Some don't. They stay. Insist it was peaceful. Just a protest. Just peasants talking too loud. It doesn't matter. The Lord's men come anyway. They arrive at dawn, armor gleaming, horses stamping, faces unreadable. They round up everyone they can find, young, old, guilty, innocent. They don't ask questions. They just point. You try to blend in. Pretend you've been mending fences all morning. But your boots are muddy in all the wrong ways. You're dragged before the manor court. Your trial is fast. No one listens. The steward testifies with a bruised ego and a theatrical cough. He points at you and says, he led them. You didn't. But no one cares. They don't hang you. They put you in the stocks. 2 days. Out in the cold. Exposed. Legs locked in place, arms too. A little wooden prison where shame and frostbite are your only companions. And worse, there's the gawkers. People pass. Some laugh. Some scowl. Some say nothing, just toss scraps of bread or cabbage leaves. You're pelted with both. Once, someone throws a fish. You never do identify the sender. But others meet your eyes. Not with pity. With quiet nods. They saw what you did. They remember the rebellion. They remember the cartloads of plague bodies. They remember scraping moss off trees during the famine while the Lord held a feast. They know why you did it. And that's enough. Eventually, they let you out. No apology. Just the clunk of the lock and a shove back into the dirt. You limp home. Your family says nothing at first. Then your mother wraps you in the only clean blanket and mutters, next time, wear a disguise. Quirky tradition? Someone leaves a bundle of dried herbs on your doorstep the next morning. A silent thank you. Or maybe just a good luck charm. You hang it by the door anyway. Life continues. You go back to work. The fields still need tilling. The animals still need feeding. But something's changed. You've been punished. But you're not ashamed. If anything, you're more certain now. Because when you stood inside that manor house, clutching a pitchfork, surrounded by neighbors, you felt it. Power. Not the kind lords wield. The kind that grows in silence, in suffering, in shared glances and whispered songs. The kind that doesn't vanish after a sentence or a scar. Historians will call this uprising the Peasants' Revolt. They'll say it failed. That it ended with executions and a return to the status quo. But they won't see what you see. That fear changed sides. And once that happens, there's no going back. Your knees still ache from the stocks. 2 days locked in that wooden frame, legs numb, spine screaming, and a piece of cabbage slowly fermenting in your hood. Dignity wasn't invited. But today, you walk. A bit crooked, a bit slower, but you walk. Which means, miraculously, you're not in a ditch or a shallow grave. So naturally, you expect things to go back to normal. They don't. Not really. People glance at you differently now. Some with respect, some with suspicion, and some with that particular look that says, please don't drag me into your next rebellion. Even the chickens give you a wider berth. The manor court has its eyes on you now. Not just the reeve or the steward, but the system itself, that tangled web of fines, duties, and consequences that never quite sleeps. You feel it following you through the village like a cold wind. So when your goat eats the flowers off the church altar, again, you are summoned immediately. No warning. No, please bring your goat in for questioning. Just a fine. 3 pence. You try to argue, but the steward's already writing your name in his big, smug ledger. You're not even sure he saw the goat. For all you know, someone else's animal did it, but yours is famous now, rebel goat. You pay, gritting your teeth, because arguing means more fines. And worse? If you don't pay, they take it from your work. 1 less loaf of bread, 1 less sack of grain. And if that doesn't work, they might take your tools, your livestock, or, if they're feeling spicy, your time. Time in the stocks, again. You know the way. The manor court isn't like the king's justice. It's more local. More personal. A stew of petty grievances, centuries-old rules, and stewards with too much time on their hands. They meet regularly, in the hall or under a tree or wherever the reeve's ink hasn't frozen, and every case is read aloud like a village soap opera. John of the Hill accused of stealing a chicken. Elsa, daughter of being fined for washing clothes in the Lord's pond. Thomas, son of Edric, failed to attend harvest duty again. And then there's you. Your name gets read more often these days. Not because you're worse, but because you're watched. A few weeks later, your cousin gets called in for letting his pigs wander onto the Lord's hayfield. He's never even seen the hayfield. But the court says the hoof prints match. He squints. You squint. Everyone squints. There's no winning. He pays. Then there's the curious case of your aunt's ale. She brews good stuff, strong, bitter, smells like you could clean tools with it. But now the court demands she pay the assize, a tax for every batch brewed. She grumbles but hands over 2 coins. That night, the steward comes by for a sample. Purely for inspection. He leaves grinning. Historians still argue whether manor courts were about justice or just revenue. You stop arguing the moment they fine you for blocking the Lord's road while fixing a fence. It wasn't his road. It was mud. But sure, let's pretend the Lord invented pathways. You begin to keep records. Tiny ones. Scratches on wood, marks on stones, secret tallies in your father's old ledger. You track how often you're fined, who gets punished, who doesn't. It's not much, but it feels like armor. Numbers don't lie. And one day, maybe you'll use them. Quirky defense strategy? Your neighbor starts bringing her toddler to court with her. Whenever she's accused of something, late rent, dirty yard, indecently loud cheesemaking, the toddler cries loudly and throws something. It works more often than it should. You consider borrowing him for your next summons. Despite it all, you adapt. You learn when to bow and when to mutter curses under your breath. You get better at looking obedient while quietly moving goats out the back gate. You attend your labor days, but sometimes you forget your tools and spend half the day searching. Your hands remain busy, your head slightly lowered, but your eyes stay sharp. The court can fine you. It can shame you. But it can't unmake what the plague and the revolt carved into you or a sense of worth. You're not just a serf. You're a survivor. A field worker who's seen lords tremble and priests vanish. You've lost too much to cower over a 3-pence goat incident. At night, you tell stories. Of the court. Of its absurdity. Of that one time the steward fined a woman for overfeeding a pig and the pig bit him on the ankle mid-sentence. Your laughter shakes the rafters. Even your little brother joins in. You keep paying fines. You keep showing up. But you also keep remembering. And one day, maybe you won't show up. Maybe the next fine gets ignored. Maybe the court calls your name and you're not there. Just a goat chewing daisies. Looking smug. The manor court has posted your name again. This time, for tying your goat to the church gate during Mass. Which, to be fair, you did. But in your defense, she only climbed 2 steps and bleated once, and even that was a polite bleat. Besides, it's not like she knows the 10 Commandments. She thinks thou shalt not chew hymnals is a personal challenge. The fine? For pence. 4. For 1 goat. You stare at the notice nailed to the post by the bakehouse, your name spelled wrong again, John of Thatchhill, classic, and mutter words that would definitely earn you a second fine if the priest heard them. You're getting good at this. The fine paying, the court appearing, the polite nodding while someone in a fur-trimmed hood tells you how your existence inconveniences your betters. You know the drill, stand straight, look humble, say yes, my lord, and pay up. Or don't, and enjoy another turn in the stocks or a task that sounds suspiciously like a punishment disguised as community service. But lately, it's all starting to feel personal. You're not alone in that. The manor court is no longer just a boring weekly ritual, it's a stage. And the play? How to keep the lower orders in their place, starring you and your goat as recurring villains. Here's how it works. The court calls a session. The steward reads a list of offences in a tone so self-important it could curdle milk. Everyone gathers around, peasants, tenants, servants. You stand before him like a schoolboy, hands behind your back, heart beating faster than it should. John of Thatchhill, tied livestock to sacred gate, disturbed worship, disrupted sanctity. You want to argue. To explain the goat had been slipping her tether and that you tied her there only briefly, right before she tied herself in an elaborate and somewhat blasphemous knot around the church door handle. But arguing only makes things worse. So you nod. You pay. You go home. Then you tell the story at the alehouse. By the 3rd retelling, the goat has sung a hymn, tripped the priest, and led the choir in a bleating rendition of Ave Maria. Everyone laughs. Laughter is resistance too. You realize something, the court isn't really about justice. It's about control. About reminding you who's in charge. About ensuring that even if you feel a little too free, they still have a finger in your daily bread. Historians still argue whether manorial justice was efficient governance or thinly veiled oppression. You don't argue. You live it. You also notice patterns. The widow with a tidy garden never gets fined. The steward's cousin, who lets his pigs sleep in the chapel on cold nights, never shows up at court. Your neighbor, who made a sarcastic joke about the Lord's hat last harvest, fined for the improper stacking of firewood. Coincidence? Sure. And your goat is the Archbishop of Canterbury. Sometimes, the court plays favourites. Sometimes it plays dice. Sometimes, you think the steward just closes his eyes and jabs his quill at the ledger for fun. And yet, the court also records your rights. Small ones. Ancient ones. Fragile like cobwebs, but still there. You have the right to graze your animals on common pasture. The right to collect firewood from the edge of the forest. The right to bake bread in the Lord's oven, after paying the bread tax, of course. The court makes sure these customs are known. Documented. Which means if the Lord tries to revoke them, you can point to the records and say, actually, That ditch has been ours since my great-grandfather peed in it. You start attending court even when you're not in trouble. Just to listen. To learn. You watch how the steward phrases things. You see who gets punished and who gets warnings. You notice that if you bring a gift, an apple, a song, a fresh egg, your name gets read with slightly less venom. Your friend Greta learns to spin her testimony into poetry. The court has no rule against it, and after 3 verses about sheep rights and hay theft, no one wants to interrupt her. It becomes a tactic. Quirky little trend? Someone begins placing small bunches of wildflowers on the court bench. No one admits to it, but everyone nods knowingly. You add a single daisy one day. The steward sneezes and finds himself for disrupting the session. Highlight of your month. Still, you're careful. Because punishment is real. A boy you know, barely old enough to grow whiskers, gets fined for trapping rabbits in the Lord's woods. A small offense. But he can't pay. So they seize his tools. Without those, he can't work. Without work, he can't eat. The spiral begins. You slip him some of your earnings later. Quietly. In a sack with a chunk of cheese and the goat's slightly chewed leftovers. You learn where the lines are and when they bend. You learn that justice isn't blind here. It's squinting, bored, and a little drunk. But it still functions. Sometimes. If you're clever, you keep attending court. Not just for yourself, but for others. You speak up when an elder forgets the date of a debt. You vouch for a neighbor's sheep when it's accused of eating barley. It was your goat, again, obviously. You become known. Not feared. Not powerful. Just respected. That's enough. And when your goat finally redeems herself by giving birth to twins under the church porch, quietly, gracefully, during Easter Mass, you name one Mercith and the other Fine. The priest baptizes them both. Just in case. You don't fall in love. Not really. Not like the songs say. There's no lute playing, no flowers tossed from towers, no poetry scribbled on parchment in the dead of night. For one, no one in your village can write. For another, you're too busy trying not to starve. But you do meet someone. She's helping thresh grain during a late harvest, sleeves rolled up, hair wrapped in a scarf that once was red and now is mostly dust. She's got a way of swinging the flail that says she's not impressed by your clumsy attempts to keep rhythm. You admire that. You say something clever. She says something ruder but funnier. You grin. She doesn't. By the next day, you're working side by side. By the end of the week, you're walking her home with your best tunic on, well, the one without holes in both elbows. You don't date. You negotiate. Because marriage here isn't about romance. It's about practicality, economics, and whether her mother thinks your house is free of rats. It's not. But your rats are polite. The real talk happens over ale, between your families. Her father wants to know how much land you tend. Your mother wants to know how many chickens she brings with her. It's like a game of chess, except with goats and dowries. Eventually, you both agree. Or rather, the adults agree, and you both sort of shrug and go along with it. You're not unhappy. She makes decent bread and doesn't snore. She says you smell less terrible than most men. You carve her a wooden spoon. She laughs, for real this time. That's basically a proposal. The wedding is small. No gold, no silk, no 12-tiered cake. Just bread, ale, roasted onions, and a chicken that died conveniently the night before. You wear your cleanest clothes. She wears a wreath of ivy. The priest mumbles the Latin. Someone spills ale on your foot. Someone else starts singing 2 verses too early. It's perfect. Your home is a one-room hut with smoke-stained walls and a roof that leaks near the bed. You spend the first night of your marriage huddled under a blanket, whispering jokes and trying to ignore the goat judging you from the corner. In the morning, you start the rest of your lives. Marriage is practical. You split chores. You fight over firewood. You invent new ways to stretch a cabbage into 3 meals. She teaches you how to catch eels without falling in the river. You build her a stool. She tells you it wobbles. You fix it. It works. But sometimes, not always, not even often, there's a moment. She catches your eye across the garden. You make her laugh when she's trying not to. You wake up before dawn and watch the sun spill through the thatch while she mumbles something in her sleep and curls closer. You realize something quietly, without fanfare. You love her. Maybe not like the nobles do, with poems and banners and tragic duels, but with kindness. With loyalty. With bread shared evenly and firewood stacked high before snow. Historians still argue whether medieval marriages were loveless, purely economic, or secretly tender beneath all the obligation. You'd say, yes. All of it. Depends on the couple. Depends on the weather. Depends on how well they hide the last piece of cheese. You have arguments, of course. Big ones. Like whether to spend coin on a second hen or save for a new pot. Or whose fault it was that the laundry froze to the fence post. Or why, exactly, your boots ended up in the fire pit. Long story. Involved the goat. Again. But the anger never sticks. There's no time for grudges when the cows need milking and the turnips need pickling. You bicker, then laugh, then go chop wood together. Children come quickly. One, then another. Then another who doesn't stay long, gone before a name. You grieve quietly. She sings lullabies to the empty cradle. You patch the roof because it's something to do. The ones who stay become your everything. Little sticky hands. Dirt-smudged cheeks. Questions that never end. You teach them to dig, to bake, to tie knots. She teaches them songs and how to read clouds like books. They grow fast. Faster than seems fair. One day, your eldest helps patch the wall, and you realize you're not young anymore. Your knees agree. So does your back. But your wife still laughs when you spill flour, still makes fun of your snoring, still lets you warm your hands beneath her apron on cold mornings, only if you pretend it's for spiritual comfort. Quirky wedding custom? Your village believes burying a spoon under the hearth brings harmony. You buried 2. You figured it couldn't hurt. One was broken. It still worked. You never become rich. You never leave the village. But you build a life. A good one. Made of habits, shared glances, tiny triumphs. And when people say, marriage is duty, you nod. But you also smile. Because sometimes, duty turns into something warmer. Something like love. You're holding your breath. Not because of anything poetic, just because the room smells like sheep, iron, boiling herbs, and sheer terror. Your wife is in labor, and you're standing outside the door of your one-room home, pretending to chop firewood that doesn't need chopping, trying not to listen too hard. Inside, the midwife mutters prayers to Saint Margaret, patron of childbirth and goats. Or maybe that's just your nerves mixing things up. Either way, there's chanting, groaning, and at one point, a scream so sharp you split the log clean in half with one shaky swing. This is your first child. Or maybe your fourth. Time gets slippery when you're surviving on cabbage and anxiety. Birth, for medieval peasants, is part miracle, part gamble, part blood-soaked endurance trial. Your wife is in the hands of the midwife, experienced, practical, slightly terrifying, and a few neighbor women armed with hot water, linen rags, and centuries of whispered advice. There's no doctor. No surgeon. No sterile gloves or fetal monitors. Just intuition, saints, and whatever potions the midwife brewed from her garden or collected from questionable places under the full moon. You've heard all the stories. Some births are quick, like dropping a turnip. Others go badly. Very badly. Babies born too early, too quiet. Mothers fading fast while everyone pretends not to notice. You've also heard the advice. Rub butter on her belly. Boil herbs and breathe them in. Hang a key above the door. Wear your shirt inside out. Remove all knots in the room, because apparently knotted laces tangle the baby's soul. Yes, seriously. Historians still debate how much of this was superstition versus early folk science. You don't care. You've untied every rope in the house, flipped every shirt inside out, and stuffed your boots with mint. Just in case. Then, suddenly, a cry. A new one. Sharp. Wet. Immediate. You drop the axe and bolt inside. There she is. Tiny, red-faced, loud as a rooster and twice as proud. Your wife is pale but smiling, exhausted but alive. The baby, your baby, is squirming in a bundle of linen, snorting indignantly like she already has opinions about your haircut. You exhale so hard it feels like leaving your own body. You don't name her yet. That comes later. After baptism. After you're sure she'll stay. Because the first days are critical, and infant mortality is as common as firewood and fleas. You've seen too many babies go. Tiny coffins. Unmarked graves. Parents who never smile again. So you watch her sleep, every rise and fall of her chest a small miracle. Your wife doses in and out. You whisper your thanks to Saint Margaret, Saint Anne, Saint anyone listening. And you make a promise, whatever it takes, she will grow up. The next few weeks are a blur. Crying. Feeding. Crying. Swaddling. Crying. Trying to change swaddling without being peed on, you fail. You sleep in snatches, eat standing up, and occasionally forget your own name. The baby, of course, is thriving, screaming with the lungs of an ox. Your wife insists on feeding her herself. Not all women do. If she couldn't, or if she passed, a neighbor might wet nurse. Or worse, you'd feed the baby with milk-soaked bread, mashed turnip, or, don't gag, chewed food from an older sibling. Yes, that's a real thing. Quirky child-rearing belief? It's considered bad luck to praise a baby too much. Evil spirits might overhear and get jealous. So instead of she's perfect, you say, she's passable, or she yells like a mule, and then knock wood 3 times while spitting into the hearth. You baptize her within days. The priest does it fast, still jumpy from plague memories, but you feel the water on her brow and the Latin words and something clicks in your chest. She's real now. Claimed. Named. Alive. You throw a small feast. Neighbors come. Bread is broken. One of your chickens mysteriously becomes stew. Someone plays a tune on a whistle. An elder woman insists the baby's got strong elbows, which is apparently a good omen. Life settles. Your daughter grows. You watch her discover things, grass, her toes, your beard. She laughs at spoons, frowns at goats, and occasionally screams at nothing, just to stay in shape. Your wife teaches her lullabies and wraps her in wool even when it's warm. You carve her toys, a pig, a doll, a spoon she uses exclusively to hit her uncle. More children come. Not all survive. You don't talk about it. Not because you don't feel it, but because you do. Grief is quiet here. Worn on the inside. You bury the tiny bundles under the willow by the stream and visit when the moon is high and no one is watching. But the ones who stay, oh, how they shine. They grow fast. They help in the fields. They tend the animals. They fall in puddles and chase chickens and eat things they shouldn't. You teach them everything you know, when to plant barley, how to spot a lying steward, how to pretend you meant to trip over that hoe. Your wife becomes the village expert on childbirth. Even the noble woman from the manor once sent for her, and you've never seen her return from a delivery not covered in glory and at least one odd stain. The cycle continues. Birth. Death. Growth. Laughter. You hold each child like they're made of glass, and every time, you think, how did I live before this? You still have little. But it feels like so much. Soap. You've heard of it. Might have even seen it once, passed from hand to hand at the manor like some mythical object forged by saints and unicorns. It smelled faintly of lavender and classism. But in your world? Soap is more legend than lifestyle. You don't bathe often. No one does. There's no bathtub in your hut, no bubbling hot spring nearby, no scented candles perched beside ceramic basins. What you do have is a wooden tub the size of a generous turnip, a rusty kettle, and a pond that bites in winter and smells of frogs in summer. Still, every so often, when even the goats seem judgmental, you commit to a proper clean. It's a process. First, you lug water from the well or stream. Then, you heat it. Then, you realize you have nowhere near enough firewood, so you spend half the morning gathering more. By the time the water's warm, you're sweating and half-washed already. Then comes the soap. Or, more realistically, soap. It might be homemade, a chunky bar boiled from animal fat, ashes, and something vaguely minty your aunt insists is medicinal. It stings your cuts, smells like smoked garlic, and disintegrates if looked at too sternly. You lather up lightly. You can't waste it. You scrub your arms, your face, your legs, and that one spot on your back that always feels slightly mossy. Then you rinse, which takes another 3 buckets and an argument with the cold air. And voila! You are now technically clean. For exactly 11 minutes. Then the chickens kick dirt on your feet, your toddler sneezes on your neck, and your neighbor's pig, bless him, rubs against your leg with a sound like wet cabbage. You sigh. You accept. You return to your natural state, somewhere between woodland creature and fermented boot. Medieval cleanliness isn't about daily showers. It's about managing expectations. You wash your hands before meals, sometimes. You clean your face and feet more often than anything else. Full body immersion? That's more festival activity than routine. Most folks air out their clothes rather than wash them. You hang your tunic by the fire, pat the mud off, and tell yourself that smoke counts as sanitizing. Your hair? Depends on the season. In spring, you might rinse it with rainwater. In winter, you just tie it back and hope no one notices the nesting birds. Historians still debate how dirty medieval people really were. Some argue peasants were cleaner than we give them credit for. After all, disease taught them fast that filth invites death. Others say hygiene was poor because, frankly, there were more important things to worry about, like staying alive and keeping the fire from wandering off midwinter. You suspect both are true. You want to be clean. But you also want to eat. And sleep. And not freeze to death. So cleanliness gets a spot on the list, just not at the top. Quirky home remedy? A neighbor once claimed nettle juice cured body odor. Another swore by vinegar foot baths. You tried both. The nettle burned. The vinegar attracted cats. You haven't repeated either. And yet, there are clean people in your village. Not clean, but noticeably fresh. The blacksmith, oddly enough, always smells of iron and wood smoke, decidedly better than goat and compost. The Reeves wife, who owns a comb made from bone and uses rosewater. And your wife, who somehow always smells of baked bread, even when ankle-deep in manure. There's also the herbalist. No one knows if she's actually clean or just so drenched in mint and marjoram that the dirt's too intimidated to settle. She swears by rosemary rinse for hair and chamomile tea rubbed into armpits. She also once suggested bathing in moonlight. You're still trying to figure that one out. And let's talk clothes. You own maybe 2 tunics. One for working. One for the best, which means less holes. You wash them, sparingly. In cold water. With lye soap. And then you beat them on a rock until they either surrender or disintegrate. Drying is done over bushes, fences, or your own body, if you're impatient and the sun's out. Underclothes? Optional. Shoes? You have 1 pair. You treasure them. You sometimes sleep next to them to prevent theft and mice infestations. Neither tactic is flawless. There's no deodorant. Just layers of linen, hopeful spacing between people, and that 1 sprig of mint you keep behind your ear for emergencies. And yet, despite the sweat and grime and occasional questionable puddle, you survive. You don't always smell great, but neither does anyone else. It's a communal funk. An aromatic alliance. Every once in a while, the Lord declares a public bath day. The village gathers at the river, strips to varying degrees of modesty, and dives in. There's laughter, splashing, and at least 1 person who tries to baptize everyone just to be sure. You emerge scrubbed, sun-warmed, and briefly radiant. Until a cow kicks over your drying towel and you fall face first into a mud patch. Back to square one. Still, you dream of a world with hot baths, scented oils, and soft towels. Maybe one day. But for now, you accept that you're clean enough. And honestly, that's a victory. You sneeze. Not once, but 3 times. Loud, dramatic, the kind of sneeze that startles chickens and makes the dog leave the room. Your wife pauses in the middle of churning butter and raises 1 eyebrow without saying a word. Great. She thinks it's the plague again. It's not. Probably. You just inhaled some dust while sweeping. But still, it's a reminder, every cough, sniffle, or rash sets off quiet panic. Because in this village, everyone knows everything. Privacy doesn't exist. Walls are made of wattle and daub, thin lattices packed with mud and straw. Not exactly soundproof. You can hear your neighbor clear his throat. He can hear you arguing about who forgot to feed the pig. Again. You sneeze and someone 3 huts over says, "Bless you." And they mean it. The village is an organism. A messy, breathing, gossip-fueled creature. You live elbow to elbow with people who've seen you muddy, blooded, hungover, and half-dressed chasing a goose that stole your breakfast. There are no secrets. Not really. You remember when your cousin tried to sneak off to court a girl 2 villages away. He was back by dusk, and 3 people had already embroidered the story into a song involving a runaway cow, a jealous miller, and an unexpected pie. You can't hide anything. The sound of a kiss in the night? Noted. The fact that you visited the healer 3 times this week? Discussed. That one time your breeches tore at the waist during haying season and you flashed the reeve? Legendary. You sigh and step outside. Someone's drawing water. They look up and say, "You all right, then?" You nod. Bit of dust. Millimeter, they say it in that tone. The I'll be telling 5 people before dinner tone. Historians often say that medieval peasants lived communally, that their lives were deeply intertwined. What they sometimes forget to add is, intertwined like yarn in a cat's mouth. You are part of an endless, noisy, overly involved village tapestry. There is no opt-out. Your home, for all its warmth and usefulness, is a fishbowl. People knock at the door without knocking. They just walk in, holding a half-plucked chicken or a handful of garlic, and say, "Heard you might need this." You're usually grateful. Occasionally, you're shirtless. Once, you were asleep. It's normal. In fact, when someone doesn't come around for a few days, it's suspicious. A family who goes quiet gets visitors. Not out of kindness, okay, maybe partly, but out of curiosity. Just checking in, they say, standing 6 inches from your fire and casually inspecting your pantry. You learn to keep some things unsaid. Or to say them quietly. Or to develop a cough that happens to coincide with inconvenient questions. You also learn who you can trust. There's your neighbor Marta, loyal, blunt, and keeper of at least 17 of your secrets. She once lied for you during a court hearing, involving goats and an open ale barrel, long story. You trust her with your life, your bread recipe, and maybe even your children. Then there's old Joffrey, who knows everything before it happens. You don't tell her anything. You just assume she's already aware. You once tripped over your own feet behind the barn, and she appeared an hour later with a salve and the exact details of your clumsy shame. You accept it. There's freedom in it, oddly enough. You don't have to pretend. No one's trying to impress anyone here. You all smell the same, struggle the same, and laugh at the same terrible jokes about the Cooper's breeches. Still, you carve out moments of privacy. You walk in the woods when you need to think. You climb the hill behind the fields to watch the sun rise and not answer questions about your wheat yield. You build a small bench behind your hut, in the one spot where no one can see you unless they climb the compost pile. Sometimes your wife joins you. You sit side by side, saying nothing, listening to the quiet hum of birds and bugs and someone yelling about stolen eggs in the distance. It's not much. But it's yours. Quirky privacy trick? Some villagers whisper secrets into hollow trees. It's supposed to trap the words. You tried it once. The tree later fell over. You took it as a sign. And yet, when you get sick, for real this time, it's the village that comes to your aid. Not out of pity, but out of reflex. Someone brings broth. Someone else leaves a blanket. Children peek in and leave flowers. Marta arrives with garlic paste and a look that says, "Don't argue, just swallow." They know everything. But they also show up. Even when you wish they wouldn't. Even when your goat escapes, again, and ends up on the church roof. They tell the story to everyone. But they help you get her down. Your stomach rumbles like a warning drum. It's been doing that a lot lately, because you're deep into a stretch of hard work and short rations, but there's hope on the horizon. A feast day. A proper one. The kind where people set aside pitchforks and mourning and remember how to smile with both sides of their face. You wake to the sound of bells, not roosters. That's how you know. Saint's Day. It doesn't even matter which saint, some long-dead bishop who allegedly once sneezed the devil out of a tree. What matters is no work today. The fields can sulk. The pigs can wait. You wash your face with a bit of cold water and even dab on some rosemary for the occasion. The whole village is shifting, laughing, stretching, coming out of doors like animals blinking at spring. Feast days are your lifelines. They come often enough to keep your soul from drying out completely. Holy days, saints' days, seasonal festivals. And sure, they're technically religious, but that doesn't stop you from sneaking a few extra helpings of pottage or dancing until your legs forget what pain feels like. The church is packed. People are in their best clothes, meaning slightly less grimy tunics and flower crowns that were picked an hour ago. You see your neighbor wearing shoes with both soles intact. You briefly consider robbing him, then think better of it. The priest gives his sermon. He's trying to sound grave, but even he knows everyone's thinking about the roast goose, the spiced cider, the soft honey cake cooling in someone's chimney. Then, blessed dismissal. You file out into the sunshine, and suddenly the village erupts like a kettle boiling over. Tables appear. Someone starts up a tune on a bone flute. A wheel of cheese makes the rounds like a celebrity. Kids race with sacks. Old men argue about whose turn it is to tell the magic cow story. A girl walks by with flowers in her hair and the clear goal of making every boy trip over his own dignity. You dig in. The food isn't fancy. But compared to your usual fare, barley, onion, turnip stew, it's a banquet. There's meat. Real meat. Salty, roasted, full of joy. You chew slowly, like it's a prayer. There's bread so soft you swear it must be a sin. Cheese sharp enough to wake the dead. Someone even offers you a baked apple soaked in honey and ale. You accept like it's a knighthood. And the drink, oh, the drink. Ale, cider, a mysterious dark liquid someone swears is imported wine. It's not. You sip, you laugh, you forget what day it is. Which, frankly, is the point. Historians agree, for medieval peasants, feast days weren't just indulgence, they were necessity. Little pauses in the grind. Schedule joy. Not just spiritually important, but physically vital. You need these days like you need food. Which is handy, because they usually come with both. You join the dancing. It's not elegant. It's not rehearsed. But it's real. You grab hands, spin in circles, stomp to the beat of a drum someone's borrowed from the chapel and turn sideways. The priest frowns, half-heartedly. Your wife laughs like she used to, before the plague. Your daughter twirls in a dress that's been patched 12 times but flows like silk today. You're drunk on rhythm and roasted onions. And here's the quirky part, in the middle of all this joyful chaos, someone starts mumming. Masked performers leap into the crowd, acting out an absurd story about death playing chess with a turnip farmer. There's a devil in pig ears. A saint with a wooden spoon. Everyone boos and cheers. Someone throws a cabbage. The cabbage is caught and eaten. Mumming is tradition, equal parts comedy, social commentary, and mildly concerning hallucination. But it's yours. And then comes the fire. The big one. They build it in the center of the green. Children toss in straw. Someone lights it with a blessed candle. The flames roar, and for a few glorious hours, you're warm inside and out. You sit with your friends, legs aching, stomach full, face glowing from both heat and ale. Someone sings. Someone snores. Someone tells a story about a goose that laid a loaf of bread. You believe it. The sky darkens. Stars prick the black like silver seeds. The fire dies slowly, but you stay beside it, unwilling to let go of the warmth, the laughter, the feeling that, for once, you're not merely surviving. You're living. Feast days end, of course. The sun rises, the tools call, the goats remind you that joy is temporary and they are always hungry. But the memory lingers. A full belly. A clean laugh. A hand held in a dance. And sometimes, in the middle of a grey Tuesday, in the middle of February, in the middle of a miserable life, that's enough. The first frost bites your fingertips before the sun even crests the trees. You wake with your breath hanging in the air, white as chimney smoke. The ground outside your hut crackles underfoot, every blade of grass rimmed with ice. Winter has arrived, not with fanfare, but with a slow, creeping grip that steals warmth from your bones and cheer from your soul. You bundle in every layer you own. Wool over linen. Sheepskin over wool. You wrap your feet in cloth before you even look at your shoes, because there's a hole in the sole and one toe that no longer feels like part of your body. The goats complain first. Then the chickens. Then your stomach. Winter as a medieval peasant isn't picturesque. It isn't snowball fights and sled rides and hot cider by the hearth. It's darkness, damp air, and the constant, nagging question, will there be enough? Enough food? Enough firewood? Enough days without sickness or starvation? You and your family eat carefully now. Gone are the feasts. No more apple pastries or roasted meat. Now it's gruel. Barley. If you're lucky, a turnip. If you're really lucky, a salted fish you forgot you'd hidden in the chimney last July. Every bite is rationed. You light the fire at dawn and pray it stays lit. Firewood is precious. If you run out, you can't just get more. Most forests are the Lord's property, and cutting wood without permission means fines, or worse. So you gather what you can from fallen branches, dead hedges, and anything that doesn't scream official timber. The fire never quite warms the room. It just chases the cold back a few feet. You sleep bundled like a root vegetable, the baby wedged between you and your wife, the older children curled against your knees like cats. You all wake with stiff joints and noses like icicles, but you wake. That counts for something. Work doesn't stop. You still muck the pens. You still haul water. You still spin, weave, mend, sharpen, patch, scrub. There are no snow days. Just days with snow. You step outside and your breath freezes on your beard and your knees mutter something rude in Latin. The village shrinks in winter. Not in size, but in spirit. People stay inside. Voices grow softer. Laughter becomes a luxury. Even the animals get quieter. It's as if the world is holding its breath. And then someone coughs. The wrong kind of cough. The heavy, wet kind. You hear it before you see it, echoing from the neighbor's hut, followed by silence. Then whispers. Then the midwife's knock. Then a bundle of herbs left on the doorstep and a hush that spreads faster than frost. Winter is cruel that way. If starvation doesn't get you, illness might. If illness doesn't, cold will. If cold doesn't, boredom might just finish the job. People go strange during the dark months, singing to their chickens, talking to dead relatives, counting icicles like coins. Historians still argue whether peasants suffered most from cold or from hunger. The answer is both. They're a matched set, like plague and dread. You try to keep busy. You mend clothes. You carve toys. You tell stories. The children gather close. You spin tales about brave geese and mischievous fairies. Your daughter insists her doll needs mittens. You make them from scraps and tell her they're sewn from elf cloth. She believes you. One evening, your wife starts singing. It's a simple melody. An old winter song her grandmother taught her. You hum along, unsure of the words but not the feeling. The fire crackles. The children sleep. And for a few minutes, you almost forget that outside your door, the world is bitter and white and indifferent. Quirky winter remedy? Someone in the village swears by onion stuffed with cloves and worn around the neck. You try it. Your neck smells like a stew pot, but you don't get sick. Coincidence? You don't care. You keep wearing it like a fragrant amulet. And the manna? Oh, they feel winter too. But differently. The Lord hosts indoor feasts, wrapped in furs and fed by fires you helped stack last summer. You can hear the music sometimes, faint, distant. A reminder that luxury exists. Just not for you. Still, sometimes they throw scraps your way. A crust of cheese. A lump of tallow. Once, a candle stub. You take it. Gratefully. Because pride doesn't feed children. On the worst nights, when the wind howls like a grieving beast and the moon hides behind angry clouds, you wrap the family tighter, add one more log, and whisper, "We're together." That's enough. It is. Barely. But still. Mud. Everywhere. As the frost melts and the ground softens, the world doesn't exactly bloom, it squelches. Spring in your village arrives like an uninvited guest, loud, soggy, and tracking filth across the floor. The air is warmer, yes, but don't get excited. It's not nice. It's wet. It's grey. It smells like thawed manure and ambition. And your boots sink half a foot into every field. You spend most of your day pulling things out of the mud, tools, carts, a chicken that wandered too far, and once, your uncle, who insisted he knew a shortcut. Still, despite the mess, there's hope again. The birds return. The first snowdrop pokes its head from the ground like a cautious child. The cows start mooing with slightly more purpose. You feel it in your chest, we made it. Not everyone did. The winter took a few. The old woman with the bad hip. The infant down the lane. One of the Reeves' sons, which everyone agrees is tragic, though slightly less tragic than if he hadn't kicked your dog that one time. You help dig the graves. Quietly. Efficiently. The priest mumbles prayers. Someone coughs. Life continues. Because it has to. You're already behind. The barley field needs plowing. The fence needs mending. The sheep need shearing before they molt all over the village green. You move like a man escaping his own thoughts. Spring is the season of desperate optimism. You plant as much as you can early, often, and with a prayer in your mouth. The memory of past famine still curls in your stomach like a shadow. You remember scraping lichen off trees and boiling old leather for soup. You refuse to go back to that. The planting isn't glamorous. It's back-breaking. Wrist-wrecking. Soul-wearying. You walk the furrows behind the oxen, dropping seeds one at a time. Over and over. Sun up to sun down. The mud sucks at your boots like it wants to keep you. Your arms ache. Your hands blister. Your knees crack like old twigs. But you keep going. Because you know what happens if you don't. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants understood crop rotation, field resting, and soil fatigue. But you know something. You've seen what happens when land is overused. Nothing grows. Or worse, everything grows sideways. So you rotate, barely. You rest a field, sometimes. You experiment with lentils, because your neighbor swears by them, and because the goats don't seem interested in eating them. You also pray. A lot. To saints of agriculture. To Mary. To the old forest spirits, just in case. You don't discriminate. You just want rain when you need it, sun when you ask, and absolutely no hail under any circumstances. Your wife handles the garden. She's already coaxing carrots out of the thawed earth, scolding the beans for growing crooked, and daring the rabbits to test her patience again. She wins every year. The children help now. More than they used to. Your eldest can dig without whining. Your youngest is mostly useful for chasing geese and spreading compost with artistic flair. You watch them, muddy and laughing, and wonder how anything so joyful can exist in a place where winter still lurks behind the hedgerows. But it does. Because peasants are nothing if not stubborn. You prepare for lambing. You dread it and love it in equal measure. The sheep are needy, dramatic, and occasionally possessed. One gives birth standing upright, mid-step. Another lies down and refuses to move for 3 days. You sleep in the barn, just in case. One morning, you deliver a lamb yourself. You're not proud of the noises you made. The midwife later says you handled it like a flailing chicken. Still, the lamb lives. So does the ewe. And you get to name it. You name it Muck. Appropriate. Quirky tradition? The village kids collect snail shells in spring, paint them with berries, and wear them as charms against bad harvests. No one knows where it started, but now you have a necklace that clinks like a tambourine when you walk. The days lengthen. The sun returns, not as a weak stranger, but as an old friend with warm hands and a knowing grin. You open the shutters. You let the smoke out. You breathe. Your hut smells like earth and sweat and hope. It's planting season. You don't know if the crops will grow. You don't know if the rains will come on time, or too much, or not at all. You don't know if this year will bring famine or feast. But you plant anyway. Because that's what you do. You survive. One season at a time. You wake before the sun, again. But today isn't for planting, praying, or scraping soot from the hearth. Today, you're walking to market. You stretch your legs, sore from yesterday's fence mending, and peek into your woven satchel. A half-wheel of crumbly cheese. A bundle of onions. One slightly confused chicken that may or may not be bartering material, depending on her mood. You pat the chicken gently. Try not to scream this time. Market days are rare. Maybe twice a month, depending on weather, road conditions, and whether the local lord has decided to host a tournament or a tax collection on the same day. He loves doing that. But when they happen, the village gets a little jittery. Everyone's got things to trade and things they secretly hope they can afford. You walk early, while the mist still clings to the road and your boots squish in rhythm. Others walk with you are neighbors, friends, that guy who only ever sells turnips and never speaks. You don't ask questions. The market is held in the next town over. It takes 3 hours to reach on foot, longer if the cart axle breaks again, or if you stop to gawk at that one fancy water mill that churns like blacksmithing sorcery. When you arrive, it's chaos. Glorious, muddy, musical chaos. Stalls line the square. Not permanent ones, just wooden frames and sagging awnings. Smells hit you from every direction: fresh bread, wet wool, sweat, dung, spiced meat pies you can't afford but sniff anyway. You dive in. First stop, selling. You trade the onions easily. The cheese gets interest from a baker who offers a small sack of rye flour and a slightly flirtatious wink. You accept one and ignore the other. The chicken refuses to cooperate, as always. She squawks so violently at a merchant's hat that he threatens to call the priest. You take her back. Trade is half bargain, half theater. You've seen old men fake back pain to lower prices, women invent tragic sob stories about their flour sacks, and one child cry on cue for a better apple deal. You try to look confident, even when someone haggles like they're auditioning for sainthood. You buy thread. A small knife. A lump of beeswax for candles. A comb with 3 teeth left, but it's your teeth now. You glance at a second-hand tunic, sigh at the price, and settle for patching the hole in your own again. Then there's the entertainment. A juggler dropping apples while cursing under his breath. A dog walking backward in exchange for scraps. A man selling magical salts that smell suspiciously like goat. You watch a puppet show with your youngest on your shoulders, the two of you laughing harder than you expected. You overhear news, too. Whispers of wars far away. Taxes rising. A new bishop who's banning dancing on feast days, again. Someone claims they saw a dragon in the north. Someone else counters with, "It was just Jeffrey in a cloak." You don't know who to believe. But it's all delicious. You hear about crop failures in a village 2 valleys over. And a woman who apparently grew carrots the size of tankards. Historians still argue whether medieval markets were central hubs of peasant life or sporadic privileges overseen by greedy lords. You know this, markets are alive. More than just shopping, they're connection. Word spreading. World widening. You learn things here you'd never hear at home. Like which herb cures sheep bloat. Or how to make ink from oak galls and vinegar. Or which merchant accidentally married a goose. Long story, don't ask him. Quirky tradition? You always save 1 coin for the mystery table. It's not official. Just a patch of cloth on the edge of the market where someone always displays the oddest item you've ever seen, a curved spoon, a bone flute, a feathered hat that smells like pickles. Today, it's a cracked mirror. You don't need it. You buy it anyway. And then, just before leaving, you splurge. 1 sticky honey cake. You break it into 5 pieces. 1 for each of you. It tastes like melted sunshine and burnt fingers. Worth every crumb. The walk home is slower. Everyone's quieter, weighed down with purchases and sleepy satisfaction. You pass the mill again. The wind shifted. The wheels churn like lullabies. When you get home, the dog barks, the chickens scream, probably jealous of their cousin's field trip, and your wife checks the sack for signs you bought anything ridiculous. You didn't. Except the mirror. She raises an eyebrow. You shrug. Seemed lucky. She smirks and hangs it by the window. If it breaks, you're explaining that to the priest. You don't care. You've got thread. Beeswax. News. And the rare feeling that, for once, you've peeked beyond the edge of your little world, and found it curious, chaotic, and full of cake. You know the sound of hooves like you know the beat of your own heart. That heavy, sharp rhythm against packed earth means one thing: someone important is coming. Or at least someone who thinks they're important. Either way, it usually doesn't bode well for your lunch. You poke your head out the door. A rider approaches, a young man in lordly colors, hair far too clean for your liking, riding a horse that probably eats better than you do. He stops at the green, tosses his cloak back with practiced flair, and calls out, "Gather the village." You sigh. That's never followed by good news. The steward arrives with him. Of course. He's got a scroll and a smirk and the smug air of a man who doesn't dig his own latrines. You gather with the others. Faces are tense, wary. This isn't your first surprise announcement. By order of his lordship, the steward begins. All tenants are required to provide additional labor for road maintenance, beginning this week. Those who fail to comply will be fined. You glance at your wife. She mouths what you're thinking. Again? Welcome to the world of medieval obligations. You're not just a farmer. You're also a laborer, a builder, a ditch digger, a messenger, and, when convenient for the manor, an unpaid mule. These extra duties, called corvée labor, are part of your life, along with all the other things you didn't sign up for but are still somehow responsible for. You have to repair roads, build fences, maintain bridges, and help with the Lord's harvest, in addition to your own. And you can't say no. Well, you can, but then you either pay a fine, lose a portion of your crops, or spend a cheerful afternoon discussing your poor attitude with a man holding a club. So you show up. With your shovel, your saw back, and a grimace you call a smile. You dig. You haul. You patch potholes big enough to swallow a pig. The sun bakes your neck. The wind steals your hat. The steward occasionally rides by and says helpful things like, "Faster, now, and that edge isn't straight." You fantasize about burying him under the next layer of gravel. And it's not just labor. There are also dues, money, grain, or goods paid to the Lord for the privilege of continuing to exist. You pay to use the mill. You pay to use the oven. You pay a share of your harvest. You pay when your animals graze. You pay when they don't graze and just stand there, judging you. Sometimes you think you're less a farmer and more a coin-producing organism. Historians still argue whether the manorial system was a fair exchange or deeply exploitative. You don't argue. You just count the eggs your hens laid and wonder if the steward knows how to divide by 3 when 1/3 to the manor feels suspiciously like half. There's also the tolls. You want to move goods? Pay a toll. You want to cross the bridge to sell cheese? Pay a toll. You want to marry someone from another village? Definitely pay a toll. You even pay a Harriet a death fee. That's right, when you die, the Lord claims your best animal as a thank you for your years of loyal suffering. Die poor and your wife watches the steward walk off with your last pig. Your pig. The one with the limp and the weird eye who still somehow felt like family. But here's the twist. Sometimes you get smart. You and the others start doing favors for one another quietly. You help fix a neighbor's fence if they help you harvest early. You build a shortcut path to the fields that the reeve doesn't know about. You stash extra firewood in hollow trees. You forget to tell the steward that 3 of your hens sleep in the woods now and are technically a wildlife. You form alliances. Not formal ones. Just nods, handshakes, shared bread, whispered deals. You become fluent in survival. You even learn to bend the system when no one's watching. The steward says all hay must be tithed. But if you dry it at your cousin's place and carry it in after dark, well, that's just grass, isn't it? Quirky workaround? Someone in your village writes fake tax records. Not good ones. Mostly symbols and crude drawings of goats. But sometimes, in the right light, it works. You're not just a serf. You're a strategist. Still, it wears you down. The constant demands. The shifting rules. The feeling that someone, somewhere, is always recalculating how much more they can take from you without breaking you entirely. And yet, you persist. Because your children are growing. Because your wife sings when she churns butter. Because every once in a while, a storm misses your fields, and the wheat stands tall like an army of golden spears, and you think, maybe this year will be better. Maybe. The road gets patched. You limp home. The steward leaves. And life goes on. Not because the system is fair, but because you are. The bells ring fast, loud, and wrong. You don't need anyone to tell you, your body knows before your brain does. The pitch is sharp, urgent, like iron tearing linen. You drop your tools. So does everyone else. A bird takes off. A dog howls. You start running. Fire. The word spreads before the smoke does. Someone shouts. You look toward the edge of the village and already see it, black smoke curling from the thatch of old Marta's hut. And where there's smoke, there's panic. You grab a bucket. Everyone does. Because when fire comes to a medieval village, it doesn't just burn a house. It threatens all of it. You sprint toward the flames. Neighbors line up in a ragged chain, passing buckets from the stream, sloshing most of it down their legs. The air grows hotter, the smoke thicker. Your eyes sting. Someone coughs hard behind you. A child cries. You reach Marta's hut, too late. The roof is already gone, the walls glowing orange. Embers leap toward the next hut like sparks looking for new stories to tell. You throw water anyway. Useless. It hisses like a snake and does nothing. But someone, brave or foolish, runs inside. A heartbeat passes. Then out they come, coughing, blackened, but holding a bundle. A child. Screaming but alive. You scream too, inside, where no one sees. Because you know how fast it can happen. One spark. One tipped candle. One careless hearth left overnight. Thatch roofs are tinder, and your homes are built close, too close. For warmth. For community. And for shared disasters. Historians still debate how often medieval villages truly burn to the ground. You don't. You've seen what's left behind when fire gets hungry. You lose 3 huts. Could have been worse. You save the rest. Barely. When the flames are out, the air smells like charcoal and fear. Everyone's black with soot. Your hands are shaking. Your tunic singed. You can't stop coughing. But you're alive. And so is Marta. She stares at her home, or what's left of it, and just says, well, at least the mice are dead. You laugh. You have to. Because crying won't rebuild walls. Rebuilding starts immediately. No one's paid. No one's ordered. You just do it. You tear down scorched beams. Salvage unburnt timbers. Stitch ropes. Patch thatch. Someone donates spare cloth. Someone else offers dry grain. No one's rich here. But no one's alone either. The children pick through the ashes, looking for anything salvageable, spoons, beads, a wooden carving that somehow survived with just a little smoke patina. Your daughter finds a scorched doll and offers it back to Marta, who laughs and tucks it into her apron like treasure. Later, you hear the Lord's men ride through. They look at the damage. Say something about natural misfortune and resilience of the peasantry. One of them pats you on the shoulder like you're a loyal ox. Then they ride off. You don't bother explaining that your rebuilt walls are crooked and your thatch is mostly wishful thinking and a few suspicious birds' nests. You're too tired. And you're lucky. It could have been the granary. It could have been your hut. It could have been the barn where your winter food is still stored. Quirky peasant belief? You bury a burned nail from the ruins beneath the new threshold to ward off future fires. Superstition? Maybe. But after what you just lived through, you'd bury a goat there if it promised safety. You eat together that night. Not to celebrate, but to remember. Someone brings soup. Someone else, bread. You sit in the shadow of the smoke-stained huts and watch the stars come out, one by one, bold and cold. Your wife presses your hand. You realize your eyebrows are mostly gone. She doesn't mention it. You'll laugh about it tomorrow. Not today. Today is for breathing. For staring at the sky and whispering thanks to whatever gods, saints, or invisible luck spirits decided to spare most of the village. You fall asleep to the smell of ash. And in your dreams, the fire doesn't come back. Some mornings, you wake up and the world feels different. Not better. Not worse. Just a little off. Like the wind is blowing from a strange direction, or the birds are singing songs they learned somewhere else. It's that feeling that change is sniffing around the edges of your life, like a curious dog. And today, it's right. The messenger arrives just after breakfast. He's wearing the Lord's colors and looks far too clean for someone who's just ridden all the way from the city. His horse is sleek. His boots are polished. His message? War. You swallow the last bite of your barley cake a little harder than expected. The Lord's been summoned to campaign. That means men. That means you, or someone from your household. Because in this feudal game, land means loyalty, and loyalty means bodies. You can't say no. Well, you can. But then someone else from your village goes in your place. Or your name ends up on a list the reeve keeps for troublemakers. Or the manor forgets to send seed grain in spring. So you go. You've never been more than a few valleys away. Now, you're being told you'll march for days, maybe weeks, to fight someone you've never met over land you've never seen in a war you don't understand. You're given a spear. And a sack. And a good luck. Training? Not really. They show you how not to stab yourself. Then they send you into a cluster of other confused peasants who are equally terrified and equally armed with enthusiasm and blunt instruments. Your wife is silent when you leave. Not angry. Just hollow. She hands you a bundle of bread, cheese, a dried pear you'd been saving. Then she pulls you close, presses her forehead to yours, and says, "Come back. You promise you will." Even though you don't know if it's true. Marching is slow. Mud. Sore feet. Blisters the size of walnuts. You share stories with the others. Some have fought before. Most haven't. You're all terrified of two things, dying, and being the first one to admit how terrified you are. Then you reach the camp. Hundreds of tents. Smoke rising in spirals. Orders shouted by men with too many feathers in their hats. You get your own patch of mud and a threadbare blanket that smells like everyone who's ever used it. Battle? It's not glorious. It's not banners and trumpets and heroism. It's confusion. Screaming. The thunder of hooves and the weight of armor and the way your hands shake so badly you can barely grip the spear. You survive by hiding behind someone taller. You swing when you're told. You flinch when others fall. You don't remember most of it. Only that you lived. You don't know how. You don't know why. You just wake up the next day with a bruise on your ribs and mud in your mouth and the sudden understanding that life is very, very small and you want yours back. Afterward, they let you go. No medals. No parades. Just a nod, a grunt, and back to your fields. You walk home slower than you left. Everything aches. You smell terrible. You've got a gash on your leg that probably needs boiled wine, but you settle for your wife's herb paste and a long nap. She doesn't cry when she sees you. She just grabs your sleeve and doesn't let go. Your children stare like you're a ghost. You are, in a way. For a few days, you're useless. You sleep. You dream of shouting and hoofbeats and wet grass stained red. You wake up with your fists clenched. The village welcomes you back, but differently. Like they're not sure which version of you returned. You smile to prove it's still you. You laugh when someone jokes about your limp. But inside, something's shifted. You've seen what the Lord's banners really mean. You get back to work. Because the wheat won't wait. You repair the fence. Milk the goats. Mend the roof. Your wife pretends not to watch you too closely. Your daughter makes you a crown of flowers. You wear it. Quirky post-battle custom? You plant a new tree in your garden. Not because it helps, but because your neighbor swore it would grow faster if fed a warrior's sweat. You figure it's worth a try. Historians still argue whether peasant soldiers fought out of loyalty or coercion. You know it wasn't loyalty. It was duty, fear, inevitability. But you also know this. You're still here. You came back. And that, in a world like yours, is a kind of victory. Summer arrives like a secret you weren't sure you were allowed to hope for. It slips in gently, sunlight creeping earlier and earlier through the cracks in your shutter, breezes that smell less like damp straw and more like warm grass. Your feet no longer crunch frost when they hit the floor. The fire goes from constant companion to occasional visitor. And your fields? They are singing. Not literally. That would be terrifying. But they hum with green promise, rows of barley waving in the wind like villagers dancing in perfect formation. The peas sprout stubbornly. The beans are showing off. Even the onions are acting like they've got something to prove. You're busy. Every day, from sun up to sundown. But it's a different kind of busy. Not desperate, not the scramble of winter or the ache of sowing season. This is the rhythm you live for. Your hands know what to do. Your body, bruised and bent from years of this work, still remembers the pace of a harvest about to begin. It's a good year. You can feel it in your bones. And in the way the birds nest early. And in the way your wife hums while tending the garden, like she's already counting the jars she'll fill. And you? You start to plan. What you'll keep. What you'll store. What you'll dare to trade. There's even talk, soft, cautious, filled with that uniquely peasant kind of fear-tinged hope of a fair being held in the next county. Not just a market. A fair. Performers, traders, craftsmen. People from towns with stone streets and teeth like tombstones. You dream of going. You might not. You probably won't. But the dream tastes sweet. You're older now. You've survived seasons, sickness, war, fire, hunger, loss. You've also survived joy, odd as that sounds. Because joy can hurt too. It reminds you how much you have to lose. But it's worth it. It's always worth it. Today, your son beats you in a foot race. He pretends it was close. It wasn't. Your daughter tries to bake bread. It's edible. Just. You eat 3 slices and lie convincingly. Your wife watches this performance with narrowed eyes and the satisfied smirk of someone who no longer needs to prove anything. The Lord rides by less often now. You still owe him, of course. That never changes. But these days, he mostly keeps to the manor. The reeve does the nagging for him, and you've become an expert in politely vague replies. The young ones ask more questions now. About the world beyond the village. About books. About why the miller is missing 2 fingers. You answer what you can. You make up the rest. Sometimes you just say, "Ask your mother." She says, "Ask the priest." He says, "Ask God." They end up asking the dog. He's the only one who never lies. Quirky tradition? On the first full moon after midsummer, the village children hold a race to the top of the hill. Whoever wins gets the first apple of the season and the title of moon champion. No one remembers where it started. No one cares. It's sacred now. You stand at the edge of your field one evening, watching the sun go down behind the trees. The barley glows gold. The wind moves through it like breath. And you feel okay. Not rich. Not powerful. Not certain. But alive. Rooted. Resilient. Historians might never know your name. They'll argue about how you lived, how you ate, how you thought. They'll dig up shards of your pots and guess what kind of person you were based on their shapes. But you? You lived. You danced when the fields were full. You laughed when the barn didn't collapse. You cried when your child walked. You prayed with muddy knees and whispered curses into your cloak when no one was listening. You weren't just surviving. You were making a life. And if you had to do it all again, through plague and famine, war and fire, mud and snow and those cursed taxes, you would. Because every year the earth turns. Every spring, something blooms. And every night, no matter how bitter the day's been, you close your eyes, draw your family close, and say to yourself, "Still here." And that's enough. The fire's low now. The kind that doesn't roar but whispers, flickering soft orange onto the walls. The kind that just barely keeps the chill away, humming to itself while the world outside falls still. You've lived a whole lifetime tonight, walked barefoot through fields, huddled by the hearth, laughed under feast day stars, and watched children grow like wildflowers in borrowed soil. You've been hungry. You've been cold. You've been hopeful. You've been the kind of person who, even in the face of impossible odds, chooses to plant seeds anyway. The kind who rebuilds after the fire. Who finds laughter in mud, music in storms, and softness in the harshest places. You may have been poor. But your days were rich, with dirt, yes, but also with meaning. So let it all fade now. Let the village fall quiet behind you, the lanterns dimming, the oxen settling in their stalls, the last sleepy child being carried to bed. Breathe in the smoke and time, and the familiar creak of a wooden beam above your head. It's safe here. You're home. And as the crickets tune up their lullabies and the wind rustles the barley just once more, let the silence wrap around you like a thick wool blanket, full of stories, full of years, full of the kind of peace only earned by those who've truly endured. Close your eyes. The work is done. You made it. Sleep now, peasant. Sleep well.